The Struggle of the Soul by Louis Joseph Sherrill, read by Vincent Bagnall. The individual in the present world is caught between two fires. On the one hand, modern civilization requires that the individual be a person of extraordinary strength if he is to thrive in the midst of that civilization, for in proportion as our civilization grows more complicated, more difficult to understand, and more resistant to rational control, to that extent, the individual is the harder put to it to find or make his place in society as a self-respecting personality, and in proportion as the pressures upon modern living grow more numerous and more disturbing, the individual is threatened or even undermined at every soft spot which he carries in his makeup as a person. In a word, modern civilization demands character marked by a high degree of strength and maturity in those who would survive it. And yet, on the other hand, modern society is producing, in vast numbers, persons who are rendered deficient because they cannot achieve precisely that kind of strength and maturity which our civilization demands. Instead, while the civilization is requiring one thing in the character of men, the society out of which that civilization has arisen tends to produce the very opposite in the character of men. Moreover, this disparity between the demands upon human character and the sufficiency of human character seems to be growing steadily as we advance further into the century. Everyone knows only too well that we live in a time of trouble, harassed by uncertainty, heartbreak, and despair, and the end is not yet. But meanwhile, as the demands upon human life mount and as the sufficiency of human life dwindles, we catch sight of a growing mass of the neurotic, the insane, the dependent, the blighted, and the untimely dead, while we hear the fear more and more often expressed that the night of Western civilization has already set in. In this time of trouble, many to whom religion has been outside the bounds of personal experience have sought to find reasonable grounds for hope, only to discover, sometimes to their frank surprise, that their quest has brought them face to face with a reality which they recognize as God, but a God with whom they do not know how to deal. Others are discovering that religion as they know it is not sufficient for the new demands which life is placing upon them. And still others, already at home in the religious life, are finding in religion greater resources than they have ever known before, and are drawing more deeply upon these resources in their day of need. When all such facts are put together and carefully examined, there is much to justify those who say that we are in a time of turning to God. But man's turning to God may prove to be only one side of something whose other side has an even greater significance. Is it possible that God is now confronting man in this modern world with deeper demand and with more hopeful promise than any of us has been able to apprehend? Here again there is much to lead one to believe that this may be so. But the time of trouble and the human need vary greatly in their meaning to a given individual. This wide variation in meaning depends partly on the time in one's life when he encounters trouble or feels need, and it depends partly on what he has already become by the time of some fresh encounter. This being so, one's turning to God, or his not turning to God, has an equally wide range of meaning, and by the same token, the inner meaning of religion to the individual varies just as greatly. While this is always true, it takes on especial significance when the sense of trouble is widespread and the sense of need deep. At the outset, we must reckon with the fact that life itself does not have the same meaning to all who live it. The meanings which men see in life are vastly varied. They are complex and they are subtle. So true is this, that it is man's custom of ancient standing to sum up these meanings in apt, symbolic terms. Any attempt to list these symbolic terms for life as a whole would soon yield a long catalogue of familiar expressions. Who has not heard say that life is a cloud or a shadow or a pain or a gamble or a journey or a dizzy ride on a flywheel or any other one of 1,000 such terms that light up a man's inner landscape in one quick revealing flash? But wide as the variety of terms is, we can get a fair idea of the range of meanings which people read into their own lives if we take three symbolic terms for life as a whole, which are very common. And these are the treadmill, the saga, and the pilgrimage. The treadmill is but one of a host of symbolic terms to express the same general but dismal feeling toward life, that it has no meaning. Some of these terms emphasize the monotony of living, as when it is said that life is a squirrel cage or a weary grind or an assembly line with a speed up. Other terms refer to excitement, which has no meaning except that it breaks monotony and gives a thrill, as when people speak of the jazz age. Still others embody in one pithy phrase the notion of a blight, which has overtaken something potentially fair and lovely. Thus life is a wasteland or a desert. Here we shall only say that life as a treadmill is virtually all of life that is known by unnumbered millions in the drafted armies, the navies, the mines, the factories, and the businesses of our century. In a word, the external features which characterize modern civilization have the peculiar quality of drying up the souls of the myriads of little people who carry that civilization forward on their backs. A second view of life is reflected in the saga, or epic, beloved of men from time immemorial. The saga tells the tale of an individual or perhaps of a family and traces the story through innumerable hardships and dangers to whatever end there is that awaits the hero. It is a chronicle of vicissitudes and exploits, and it takes on its peculiar quality from the fact that it lifts the heroism and glamour of life to a poetic level. Thus the saga rises above the treadmill by exalting the distinctively human qualities which exist, if we can see them, within the treadmill. The saga teaches men to see and honor the humanness of the natural virtues, such as courage, patience, endurance, self-sacrifice, and the like. Among numerous examples, a classic instance of the saga or epic is Homer's Odyssey, the story of Ulysses and his wanderings in antiquity. As we read or hear the great sagas, whether of ancient or of modern time, we may be moved by the desire to embody a kindred kind of heroism. Thus in Tennyson's Ulysses, we can sense the impression created by Homer's Odyssey on a modern mind, as expressed in Tennyson's familiar words. Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. Push off, and sitting well in order, smite the sounding furrows, for my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars until I die. The saga, at its best, has a twofold value. It shows wherein the nobility of great character lies, and it shows the heroism of the common life. Even when trivial and preposterous, it still serves to lift the hearer a little way above the treadmill. But by its nature it is humanism in poetry or symbol. It sings, but its notes are essentially bound by the human horizon. Its theme is that of Virgil in the famous opening line of the Aeneid, I sing of arms and of the man. If there is more than that in the sum of things to be sung, the saga cannot sing it. In saying this, it is not forgotten that the saga may teem with gods. Indeed, the Odyssey here used as the classic example is a case in point. But just the same, the saga is secular in the root meaning of that term. That is, it concerns the people and the events of a saeculum, a particular age or generation. And again, we must say that if there is more to sing than the saecium in which the saga is laid, the saga cannot sing it. Life is a pilgrimage. Observe where the great differences lie between life as a treadmill, as saga, and as pilgrimage. The name of pilgrimage has ordinarily been given to men and women who have escaped from some unbearable treadmill and have gone out on a journey both of mind and of body in quest of some shrine, as was so commonly done during the Middle Ages, or in quest of a land, where they hoped to construct a society embodying their religious and political ideals. The pilgrim in this sense has of course played an incalculably great part in laying American foundations, not only in settling the Bay Colony, but also in opening up our western states as well. But pilgrimage is a state of mind before it is a journey, and many who deserve to be known as pilgrims can never take a journey of body. Yet they refuse to live in a treadmill. For some who are pilgrims at heart have to spend their days in the same round of constantly repeated activities as their fellows. But to them it is no longer a treadmill. For them, as for Jacob while he was serving his 7 years for Rachel, the flow of physiological time has been speeded up by a new motive, and the sense of monotony has no place in their living. The differences between life as pilgrimage and life as saga are equally great. Life as saga, we saw, is life bounded in two planes. It can celebrate humanity, but it is essentially limited to humanity, and it can celebrate the saeculum, the current time, but it is limited to time. Life as a pilgrimage, on the contrary, is open in both of the planes where life as saga is closed. In the vertical plane, so to speak, where life as saga is closed, life as pilgrimage is open to more than the merely natural and human, so that human existence is consciously related not only to nature and to humanity, but also to God, who transcends nature and humanity. And in the horizontal plane, if we may again use a spatial symbol, where life as saga is secular in the sense of being limited by time, life as pilgrimage is open to eternity. It tastes what has been strikingly called the power of an endless life. We have now to inquire how one may pass back and forth between life as a treadmill or saga and life as pilgrimage, and in particular we shall wish to ask what part is played in this passage by the crises of experience. At birth, a new human being emerges, and we say that this new creature has life. If pressed to say what life is, we are soon overwhelmed with difficulties. But when we speak of human life, we ordinarily imply at least two things: that there is a body and that there is a soul, or psyche. Philosophy is divided as to the nature of the relation between body and soul. Philosophers with a Platonic bent tend to regard the two as distinct. Those whose training is in the sciences, however, are more likely to regard body and psyche as a unity, and this view gains weight with the development of a modern branch of medicine known as psychosomatic medicine, in which the intimate relation between psyche and soma, body, in the production and healing of physical as well as mental illness, is the subject of study and the ground of therapy. In the biblical view of man, body and soul are commonly regarded as a unity. In that view, the soul or psyche is not a separate entity which has come to take up residence in a body. Rather, the psyche is life itself, the life principle which animates the body. Thus, body and soul together constitute so close a unity that a modern reader will have much difficulty in following biblical thought unless he is prepared to recognize that to a biblical writer, both consciousness and the emotions are seated through the whole body, not only in the intellect, but also in the heart, the diaphragm, the kidneys, the bowels, and so on. The soul or psyche is the life which animates the whole and is breathed into man by God. Furthermore, in the biblical view, this body-soul is of the order of nature. That is to say, in the ancient biblical view, and now in the modern scientific view, the soul or psyche exists in a plane with which we are familiar, an earthly plane, which any who will may examine and study. In fact, the ancients were shrewd observers and apt in their generalizations. Such books as Proverbs and Ecclesiastes contain much of this ancient lore, describing the devious ways of the psyche with an earthy realism which is so striking now because so true in any age. In animate nature, there is an inward propulsion to grow. In plant life, for example, the seed, when placed in suitable surroundings, will germinate, swell, send out roots, send up a sprout, break into leaf, and eventually complete its cycle by producing seed again after its kind. This it does as if by a sort of inner compulsion. So strong is this compulsion that in growing, a tree, for example, will lift, push, or split heavy obstructing objects in order to complete itself. In animal life, a similar phenomenon is to be seen. A young bird, for instance, acts as if there were an inner compulsion to learn to fly, to leave the nest, to sing, to mate, to feed and defend its own young, to migrate, and so on. And in the human being, we have also to reckon with a comparable kind of inward propulsion to grow, that is, to pass through certain stages as one moves toward the complete fulfillment of life. Some of these stages of growth, and the inward propulsion to pass into them, are very obvious, for they involve the body. And only very rarely does an individual fail to emerge from the womb, and if living, to increase in size, weight, and height, to walk, to talk, to become pubescent, and so on. In the case of the psyche or soul, there are stages, too, as truly as for the body. To specify these with any sense of completeness in the analysis is a baffling task, for human psychic development is highly complicated. With reasonable confidence, however, we may speak of 5 great stages, and of a deep inner propulsion to achieve them. They are as follows. Number 1, becoming an individual, a stage typical of childhood. 2, becoming weaned away from the parents, typical of adolescence. 3, finding one's basic identifications, typical of young maturity. 4, achieving a mature view of life and the universe. And this may be achieved early, but it is a typical quest of middle life. 5, achieving simplification of life in its physical, material, and spiritual aspects, so that the soul may, with less and less impediment, progress toward its chosen destiny, typical of old age. Now, the inward propulsion to achieve these stages, or some such stages as these, is very strong. It is a powerful thrust from within, keeping infant and child in restless activity of body and psyche. It keeps the adolescent in tension with his personal environment. It drives the young to seek the niche they will fill in social and economic life. It keeps those of more mature years feeling empty still until they have gained some satisfying sense of at-homeness in the total universe of thought and affairs. And as he nears the horizon of life as he has known it thus far, it impels him to set his inward house in order for whatever he believes still awaits him beyond the veils of time and sense. From the angle of psychology, we can say that this inward propulsion is of the order of nature, for it is instinctual, not learned. Those who prefer the language of psychology may see in it, if they choose, a manifestation of what has been called the life instinct. From the angle of biblical thought, we can say that it has been given us by God, and it is good, very good. It may well be that this is some part of what is meant when it is said that man was made in the image of God. If this were all there is to the story of the human psyche, there would be little to human history except the recounting of the idyllic tale of happiness and progress. But the psyche knows another motive, one which seems to be peculiar to the human being, apparently not being found in either plant or animal life. It runs exactly counter to the inward propulsion to growth. It is a dread and fear of growth, a shrinking back from the hardships, the risks and dangers, the suffering which are involved in each stage of growth. The infant emerges from the physical womb, but the psyche can decide only after prolonged struggle whether to emerge from the psychic womb of safety or to stay enmeshed within it. The youth wishes to shake himself free of his parents. Yet as the years roll on, child and parent may find themselves locked together by imprisoning bonds, which neither is capable of breaking. In young maturity, one who has achieved a certain type of free individuality may miss the deeper fulfillments of young maturity because he is afraid of the mature responsibilities of marriage, parenthood, parental love, business, state, and religion. Toward middle life, one may find his philosophy of life wholly inadequate to the demands placed upon it, and yet from pride or fear, he may shrink from the frightening task of reorienting life. And as old age approaches, one may refuse to face it, clinging desperately to the outward trappings of youth, reckoning his golden age as somewhere in the past, and thus in his boastful refusal to grow old, he is already dying, but does not know it. In all these, and 1,000 more like them, the soul takes on the role of Lot's wife. Looking backward to the good things about to be left behind, and unable to go forward, one is immobilized into a pillar of salt which cannot escape from its own desolation. If one wishes a psychological term for this shrinking back, it is at least partly akin to what has been called the death instinct. From the angle of religious thought, shrinking back comes as a result of temptation or testing, and in biblical language it is written of the Son of Man that his temptations to draw back from the hard way were of Satan. That is to say, the motive of shrinking back is, in the speech of some modern theologians, demonic. In the last analysis, this, as much as many other things of which the term is used, is rebellion against God. At any time, from infancy to old age, crises may arise in the individual life. In any one of a myriad combinations of outward and inward events, one finds himself in circumstances where he feels the propulsion to pass over some sort of Jordan and enter upon some new level of responsibility and recompense. And yet, this new step forward is a step into the unknown, peopled with dangerous creatures of fact, as truly as with menacing creations of fancy. The stage one has already reached in growth is good, though not yet fully satisfying. In that case, is it better to bear the ills we know, or fly to others that we know not of? So the motive of growth is met by the motive of shrinking back. In that time of conflict, we have come to crises, whether we are 1-year-old or 70 years and 10. Now, crisis can be conceived and dealt with in purely secular terms, if we so choose. That is, crisis can be regarded as occurring, as indeed it does, in the present moment of our saeculum, the precise temporal hour in which we happen to be living. In that event, if a crisis proves unmanageable within the limits of the person's resources, the person may seek to solve the crisis by some drastic means, such as violence to himself or others, or he may seek help from some qualified source, such as a psychologist or psychiatrist. It is not enough to say merely that such help is competent, assuming now that this is so. It needs to be seen also that such assistance may draw upon insights not commonly possessed by other persons at present available in society. There is not the slightest intention of discounting its value when we say what must now also be said, namely, that when a crisis is met at the secular plane, the solution too will have to remain in the secular plane, at least as far as conscious apprehension of the meaning of the solution is concerned. It is a solution at the level of the saga, and that solution may succeed in bringing the person out of the treadmill and into his own saga. That in itself is good, a thing to be sung. But if a pilgrim aspect of the crisis is possible or even conceivable, the secular notion by its own nature is incapable of entering that cosmic realm. But crises can also be conceived and dealt with in religious terms. In that case, the very same events can be given not merely a temporal setting, but also a setting which is universal and eternal. And the solution of crisis, in this case, becomes a happening which transpires in the order of nature, but in its deeper essence, it is seen to be of the order of grace, emerging for the benefit of man from a source which is beyond him. There are religious terms to express this wider universal and eternal significance, which is latent in every human crisis. 3 of the more notable of these are confrontation, judgment, and faith. Let us examine the meaning of these terms as they bear upon crisis. Confrontation. By confrontation is simply meant that in crisis God confronts man. That is to say, the crisis, which is a time of decision, as between advancing into growth or shrinking back from its perils, is a time when God confronts the human creature. The literature of the Jewish Christian heritage abounds in illustrations of this type of experience. These instances have one common thread running through them all, which is this: the individual facing some crisis in which he is being torn loose from the comfortable moorings where he had arrested himself, apprehends it also as a fact of experience that his crisis was not a purely personal concern to himself alone. God was present in the combination of circumstances which were placed before him. They vary, however, in the degree to which the recognition of God as confronting man is on the instant during the crisis, or later in retrospect. The time of crisis and of confrontation is also a time of judgment. Indeed, in the Greek language in which the New Testament is written, the word crisis means judgment. That is, in the hours of crisis, the soul is under divine judgment. In principle, 3 ways are open in periods of crisis: to go forward beyond the stage which one has already reached, or to stay where one is, or to retreat to a still earlier and lower stage. Both the second and the third of these, staying or retreating, are a shrinking back, and in a most expressive passage in the Epistle to the Hebrews, the divine appraisal is put in these words: "If he shrink back, my soul hath no pleasure in him." What is this but to say that such a one, by shrinking back, cuts himself off from the constructive, healing, redeeming, strengthening, and joy-giving power resident in the universe? Cut off from these, he is exposed the more surely to the consequences which must inevitably follow upon the violation of the very principles upon which the universe itself is laid down. If strong, such a one may lay about him titanically, like some Samson or Hitler, until he has pulled down the pillars of temple or nation about him, sweeping others with him down into ruin and utter chaos. If he is a feebler stripe, he may approach with every crisis a little nearer to being a zero, inert in the social order, or a parasite whom others must support, or an invalid. Conversely, the religious term for the contrasted attitude is faith. The 2 attitudes of unbelief and of faith, with their consequences, are clearly set out in 2 passages from Hebrews, for that epistle, in one manner of viewing it, is a treatise on faith and unbelief. "And to whom sware he, God, that they should not enter into his rest, but to them that were disobedient? And we say that they were not able to enter in because of unbelief? For yet a very little while he that cometh shall come, and shall not tarry. But my righteous one shall live by faith, and if he shrink back, my soul hath no pleasure in him. But we are not of them that shrink back unto perdition, but of them that have faith to the saving of the soul." And now, with this view of faith before us, let us return for a moment to the thought of life as treadmill, as saga, and as pilgrimage. There we saw that life as treadmill and as saga is life conceived as being restricted to the plane of the human and the secular. But the attitude which views life as a pilgrimage and raises it above both treadmill and saga is precisely the attitude to which the writer of the Epistle to the Hebrews gives the name of faith. In his famous defining sentence, he observes that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. In order to appreciate the boldness of his statement, one needs to follow the argument in the preceding chapters of his epistle. The thread of that argument, as far as it concerns us here, is of this nature. There are 2 orders of existence. One of these is the earthly. It is what we now commonly call history. Its 2 great characteristics are, first, that it is temporal, and therefore will eventually come to an end. The other, that it is not completely subject to God. The second order of existence he calls the heavens, or the heavenly. This refers to what we now call commonly the cosmic, or the universal. But it has 2 great characteristics which we do not always attribute to those terms, namely, it is eternal, and it is completely subject to God. These 2 characteristics of the heavenly or cosmic order are of primary importance if we would follow the thought. Furthermore, according to the writer of this epistle, in the heavens, that is, in the cosmic or eternal order, there are certain forms of reality which may be called archetypes. And although the archetypes are eternal, they can be known and experienced during the earthly and temporal existence in either of 2 ways. One way in which an archetype can be known is by means of its pattern, or its shadow, or its figure. For an eternal archetype can have a pattern or copy on earth, or the archetype may, as it were, cast a shadow on earth, a shadow which partly reveals the nature of the archetype. Or the archetype may be partly known by means of a figure or similitude which shows some likeness to the archetype. Of these three terms, the strongest is the pattern, for it corresponds to what we mean nowadays when we refer to one specimen of an entire species. When we know a specimen, we know a true part of a species, although we do not know the entire species. But all three, the pattern, the shadow, and the figure, yield a true, although only a partial, knowledge of the archetype. Faith is, so to say, the organ or instrument by which man, while still living in time and enmeshed still in nature and in history, may yet pass really and actually into the eternal order of existence. He has the substance, that is, the actuality of the things hoped for, and has them now in danger, in suffering, in defeat, or in victory, in the years of long-delayed fruition, as truly as in the hours of ecstatic fulfillment. His is the life of the pilgrim, who, while seeking the better country, has already begun to find it and live within it. His life is now open in its two dimensions. It is open to God, as revealed in Jesus Christ, who is the image of God, and it is open to eternity through faith, which is the substance or actuality of an order of life which is above time and nature. In biblical thought, this new life can be regarded from either of 2 points of view. When seen from the human side, it is a life of faith. When seen from the divine side, it is a life of the Spirit. For in the biblical view, God takes the initiative in confronting man. At a particular point in history, there was a supreme and unique confrontation by means of the person, Jesus Christ. That confrontation is prolonged in history by means of the personal Spirit, variously called by such terms as the Spirit of Christ, the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit, or simply the Spirit. The Spirit prolongs the unique confrontation which befell men in a bodily form. Man's response, as we've just said, is faith. The result is new life, a new creation. This newness of life is often regarded as a decisive transformation, so radical as to mark the beginnings of a new life which had not before existed. In John, it is called being born anew, or from above. Paul is fond of the term resurrection to indicate an even more radical transformation, which can be expressed only by the symbol of being raised from the dead, here and now, to a new life, which is a life of the Spirit. This new life can be viewed as a life of the Spirit because it is a creative act of the Spirit of God, and because it is indwelt by that same Spirit. It is not entirely clear whether Paul thinks of the human being as having a dormant spirit which is awakened, as it were, from death to becoming a living spirit under the activity of the divine Spirit, or whether he thinks of human spirit as never existing at all in a given person until implanted or breathed in by the divine Spirit. Such conceptions as rebirth and resurrection, both referring to present life, perhaps give weight to the first of these possibilities, that is, the dormant human spirit called to life by the divine Spirit. But in any event, human spirit, whether quickened from dormancy or called out of non-being into being or brought about by a wholly new creative act, is different from soul. And it would appear that, strictly speaking, soul or psyche on the one hand and spirit on the other cannot be taken as synonyms. Soul, as we have repeatedly remarked, is of the order of nature, while man's spirit is of the spiritual order. That is, it is of the divine and eternal order of existence. So to say it once again for emphasis, if new life results from God's confrontation of man, this new life can be called a life of the Spirit, because man's spirit has now been brought to life, or it can be called a life of the Spirit because of the creative initiative of the divine Spirit. Or yet again, it can be called a life of faith because of man's response to the divine initiative. And this new life of the Spirit is a life which is constantly being confronted by God, repeatedly, over and over, on and on, as the years go by. In New Testament writings, this activity of God in the believer's life is ordinarily expressed in terms of the Holy Spirit, which is now within man in the new life of the Spirit. As indwelling Spirit, he is shown on the one hand as bringing assurance of acceptance by God, with resulting peace, which is greater than mere intellectual understanding, and with joy, which arises continually in any surroundings like pure water springing forth from unpolluted depths. Yet on the other hand, the Spirit is shown as constantly confronting man both inwardly and outwardly, with promptings and with disturbances of any complacent spiritual status quo. The outward confrontation is especially to be seen in the means of grace, particularly in the Word of God and in the sacraments, which are outwardly given but to be inwardly appropriated, thus giving rise in turn again both to inward assurance and to promptings. The result is commonly spoken of as sanctification, which is not perfection now achieved, but rather is a growth toward that state. If one has followed the thought thus far, he is now asked to go one step further and recognize that the function of religion in the Jewish Christian stream is not merely to bring peace and comfort. Its function, just as truly, is to disturb us repeatedly within the very peace and comfort which we enjoy. If its function were only to bring peace and comfort, religion would basically be a denial of life, for life does not so serve us. But rather, and contrary to much that is commonly assumed, Christianity embodies the profoundest possible acceptance of life, in the sense that it discloses a way to deal with the peace-disturbing aspects of existence and transmute them into good. Thus we have the paradox that the soul can be made perfect only through suffering. The classic expression concerning this role of the Christian religion is the saying of Jesus, "Think not that I am come to send peace on the earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword." For it is precisely when man is in peace, comfort, security, satisfaction, and complacency that God confronts him in crisis and in judgment. It now remains to give more direct statement to 3 points. One is that the garments which God wears, so to speak, when confronting man very often, are no other than the circumstances which confront a man and which require of him a decision to grow or to stay as he is or to regress. It is these circumstances which compel us to decide, and these circumstances of the common life may be the form in which God comes again into our little part of human history, coming thus to our senses, confronting us, calling on us for the response of faith to the end that we may enter in a little further. Again, these crises and these confrontations are not restricted to any one age or period of life. They begin in infancy and they do not end short of the final hour of physical life. There are various stages in particular, and one point to be stressed as applying generally to them all. It may be called the foundational aspects of growth. For each stage, when we live through it in such a way as to meet adequately the demands it lays on us, leaves behind, as it were, a deposit of growth. It becomes an asset and a resource for each succeeding stage. On the other hand, each stage where we fail to meet adequately the demands it lays upon us leaves behind it a deposit of the very opposite kind, a defect or perhaps a weak or even malignant spot in the foundations of life. And this weak or malignant place in the foundation has a way of acting constantly afterward, as a barrier or a plague source to keep us from the completeness which we might otherwise attain.
Child is born. We are now to begin in thought with an infant who is newly born into the world and about to start his journey in it. From the moment of his birth, hundreds of practical questions arise, but these must not divert us from the central fact that an infant is not born into a vacuum, but rather into a living world of living people. We shall miss the most important insights at the very outset if we assume that he can be weighed, fed, measured, tested, and trained as if he were in isolation. The heading of this chapter, A Child is Born, is taken from an ancient book, but this clause, torn from its context, is misleading, just as misleading as it would be to try to consider a child torn from his social context. The full sentence from which the chapter heading is taken reads, "For unto us a child is born." And that is the true order, whether we look at the event of birth from the angle of biology or of psychology or of religion, for there must be a we before there can be an I. And again, this is as true in religion as it is in psychology. Therefore, in this chapter, although we begin with the newborn infant, we must also begin with the parents. In order to simplify this highly complex period in the life of an individual, we may liken childhood to a drama lasting, say, some 11 years. And this drama has its principal characters, its various acts, and its central problem for each character. The principal characters in the drama are the infant, his mother, and his father. There may, of course, be other principal characters who are present and felt in the drama, such as other children, older or younger, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and so on. The possible combinations are very numerous, but the key persons for our purposes still are the three: infant, mother, and father. If one wishes to think of an eternal triangle in the drama of life, this is it. The drama has three long acts. The first, infancy, we may regard as lasting for some 3 years. The second is early childhood, lasting, say, from 3 until about 6 years of age. The third is middle and later childhood, from about 6th through perhaps the 10th or 11th year. It need hardly be said that ages can be stated only in the most general approximations. The central problem for the child, as he lives through the struggles of this drama, is called individuation. The problem of individuation can be stated in its simplest terms in either of two ways. From the child's point of view, the question is, how can I become an individual? Although obviously he does not express the struggle in such words as these. From the point of view as the parents or the observer, the question is, what kind of individual will this child become in the setting in which he lives these first years? As we shall see in greater detail through the rest of the chapter, the central problem of childhood, namely individuation, is not presented to a child all at once, nor can it be solved all at once. Rather, in actual life, it is broken down into a series of more specific problems of growth. Under favorable conditions, these more specific problems of growth can be solved one at a time as they arise. Thus, in infancy, the infant faces his first and earliest problems of growth. In early childhood, the problem of growth is broadened and takes on a somewhat different form. And similarly, again, in the third act of middle and later childhood. And furthermore, the solution which is found in infancy becomes the basis for the kind of solution which can be achieved in early childhood. And that, in turn, affects the kind of solution which is possible in middle and later childhood. The kind of individuation which the child can achieve is governed to a large degree by what may be called parental adequacy. In part, this parental adequacy depends on the solutions of the problems of growth, which the mother and the father in their turn were able to achieve up to the time of their marriage. The mother and the father each brought to the marriage what they had become up to the day of the marriage. For both the mother and the father had earlier passed, each of them, through his own drama, not only of childhood, but also of youth as well. They bring to the marriage their own two characters, each as it had developed in their parental homes, and wherever else either of them may have lived. And in further part, the parental adequacy depends on the nature of the interaction between these two characters, the mother and the father, after the marriage. Thus the infant is, as it were, born into the confluence of two great and long streams of character, streams which have flowed down from the remote past into today, streams which have now flowed together in marriage. And now this new joint stream awaits the infant, takes him into its own embrace, and carries him forward into his own future. And just as the child now faces his own problem of individuation, even as his parents before him faced theirs, so too the parents now, with such adequacy as they have achieved before and after their marriage, begin to face their own fresh, new issues in their growth as lovers and as parents. More than that, just as their child does not face his problem of individuation all at once, so the mother and the father, as wife and husband, do not face their own issues of growth all at once, but rather face them in a new form at each stage of the child's growth. So for all the persons of the drama, infant, mother, and father, the drama is not only infinitely varied, but is also, as it were, on a moving stage, where each year, or better, let us say each day, confronts all of them with fresh growth demands. The infant merges into what to him is an undifferentiated mass of being, helpless and utterly dependent. He, of course, knows nothing of mother, father, or aught else. But we, for our part, thinking of his situation, must look ahead and be reminded of what he naturally cannot yet know, and that is that he has entered into a world in which he has already encountered and afterward will always be encountering two great classes of being. He must establish some kind of relation with each of these two classes of being. This is his first great confrontation, coming to him both from nature and from God. And it is of the utmost significance that the kind of relation he will sustain to each begins to be established from the very hour of his birth. One of these classes of being is persons. On the instant of his birth, he is confronted by persons. Even in the extreme case of the unattended birth, he encounters the mother, not now as a part of her, but as separated from her, yet needing her. At the hour of his birth, he encounters persons, or at least and inevitably one person, and thenceforth, until the hour of the physical death, he will be surrounded by persons. If his life proves even remotely to approach what we think of as normal, he will literally be surrounded by persons, more or fewer in number, until breath ceases. And on the other hand, should it later develop that he hates all persons, turns against them all, and strives by some means to flee from all persons by completely withdrawing into himself or by fleeing to some desert or island to be alone, even so, the basic formula of his life will still be shaped, though negatively, around persons. His primary character need is that of learning to relate to persons, and in infancy, which is the first act of his drama, he makes his first beginnings in the vast sea of human relationships by means of his relation with the person closest to him and on whom he is most dependent for affection, food, comfort, and security. That person, ordinarily, is his mother. The other order of being which confronts the infant is things. Things surround him at the instant of birth, and as with persons, so too with things, even more inexorably than in the case of persons, things will continue to surround him with no moment of exception until he has ceased to breathe, and even then things will receive his body into their still embrace. Food, toys, clothing, bed, and other articles of furniture, house, money, cars, books, works of art, all nature, animate and inanimate, countryside, village, or city, banks, bonds, stores piled with goods, factories, weapons, armaments, things by day, things by night, things at hand and things in the sky, out to unimaginable distances. Things shifting in value and interest as he grows, but things at every age of his life he is incessantly surrounded by things. And if his primary character need is that of learning to relate to persons, His second character need is that of learning to relate to things. And as we shall see, the way in which he begins to meet this second character need in infancy will be deeply influenced by the way in which his primary character need begins to be met. The way in which the child's primary character need begins to be met, that is, the kind of relation to persons which the infant begins to have, is profoundly influenced and perhaps determined by parental adequacy. Basically, we now mean a deep emotional readiness for this child before he is born, and an equally deep emotional acceptance of him after he is born as he grows. This emotional readiness, or any lack of it, or any substitute for it, will come to the child first ordinarily from the mother, and will first be felt by him in his relation with the mother in the daily events and routines such as holding, feeding, tone of voice, bathing, toilet training, and so on, through the thousand of early contexts where feeling in the mother calls forth the appropriate answering feeling in the infant. All this, of course, is long before the infant can utter his first word. But the mother's adequacy, in its turn, profoundly influenced by two factors: the way she herself lived through her own drama as child and youth, and the quality of the emotional relationship now existing between herself and her husband. In other words, both husband and wife are equally, although differently, involved in parental adequacy. Under favorable conditions, each is able to supply the other's emotional needs, and in consequence, it is as if there were an illimitable supply of genuine and outgoing love to sustain each other and the infant, and to begin to draw forth from the infant his own responding feeling of the same kind. The second act of the drama of childhood is so complicated as it unfolds day by day in actual life that we cannot here follow it in its details, nor is this the place to enter a discussion of the various interpretations of the essential nature of the struggle which goes on. Here it will be sufficient to say that a child is confronted not only by a world of persons and a world of things, but the world of persons which confronts him is a world of male and female. The world of male and female comes to him from nature, for there it meets him at every turn. But there is more to the story than that, for it is a religious confrontation as well. This is nowhere better expressed than in the Genesis account of creation. Male and female created he, them. For the Lord God said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him an help meet for him." And the Lord God made a woman and brought her to the man. Thenceforth woman confronts man, and man confronts woman. This is as much to say that the fact of male and female is not merely a fact from nature. It is a fact from God. It should be said, too, that this is deeper than that what is commonly called sex. For there are two great roles in life, of masculine and feminine, and these two not only confront, but hold the possibility of complementing and completing each other. In that sense, then gender is more profound than sex, and the character problems it presents need to be solved at an earlier stage. Now, in the second act of the drama of childhood, a child is placed in a situation where normally he must learn to relate to the parent of the opposite sex, as to male or to female, as the case may be. And it appears that the solution which is achieved will affect three further elements of character which grow out of or are reared upon the results of this second act. These are, first, the nature of the roles which the mother and the father respectively will have in the later life of the child as he advances in age, the kind of conscience the child will have, and the role which the child himself will take in life, as predominantly masculine or predominantly feminine. As parents enter this period in a child's life, their adequacy is affected by all such factors as have already been considered. But now two other factors, already either latent or active in their characters, begin to be felt in fresh force in their relations with the child and in his response to them. One is the extent to which they trust each other emotionally in their relations to the child. In the degree to which they trust each other deeply and completely in every phase of life, they can live farther into the drama of life as a whole, and parenthood in particular, as parents who mutually support each other and take their respective roles as masculine and feminine in a way which supplies the two elements needed in every child's development. On the other hand, in the degree to which they cannot trust each other emotionally in their relations with the child, they become rivals for love from the child and the domination of him. The other factor is the character of the parents themselves as predominantly masculine or feminine. If the father is predominantly masculine and the mother predominantly feminine, then as far as these factors are concerned, the parents are in a better position to meet the child's needs in this period. But if the mother is predominantly a masculine character or the father predominantly a feminine character, then to that extent the child's need to relate both to a masculine man and a feminine woman are thrown out of balance. The new tension in this period arises from the child's inner need to begin to be released from the infant's relation to the mother, for should he be unable to relax this earliest relationship with the mother and reestablish it on a more mature level, many kinds of growth which belong to later stages may prove impossible. The early initial release of the child from the mother is normally a release of the child to the father, that is, to a new and deeper relation of closeness to the father. But then, lest this relation be too close to permit growth, the father in turn is confronted by the need to release the child emotionally from too close a dependence upon him, and the child may enter a new closeness of relation with the mother on a basis which is not infantile. In principle, this alternation of the greatest closeness of the child's relation with the mother and father, respectively, may need to be repeated several times during childhood and adolescence, each time at a more advanced stage of maturity. Where the results of this act of the drama are generally favorable, both the parents grow in the maturity of their love for each other and for the child, for each is able, as the need arises, to release the child from a closeness which is necessity of growth, and yet becomes a prison if too prolonged. But where the drama cannot be lived through and instead is frozen at some intermediate point, either parent may begin subtly to dominate a son or daughter emotionally in a dominance-dependency relation from which the child can release himself later only after great suffering, if at all. Where the results are generally favorable for the child, consider first the case as a boy. A boy in this case is able to relate on a deep, satisfying, and constructive basis with his father, and this in turn is believed to affect the boy's growth of character in several important respects. For one thing, it appears to affect the nature of his conscience. The hostility which naturally arises in this, as in all human relations, need not be repressed, but can be handled in a relation where love is sound and strong. Thus the deep sense of guilt which disturbs so many who have not successfully lived through this act is kept at a minimum, and the conscience can be of a more healthy kind. Again, if a boy can identify deeply with his father, especially if the latter is predominantly masculine, the boy is that much the better equipped himself to take the masculine role in his own life. And since such a boy is able to reestablish a close relation to his mother at a level beyond that of infancy, his attitude toward the mother and toward other women later can be of a more healthy kind than when he is kept in an infancy relation until he is adolescent or grown. Where the results are less favorable, the boy, being unable to secure release from the mother, may be unable to identify deeply with the father. Then, in further consequence, he may develop a morbid conscience and find far greater difficulty in assuming a masculine role. In the case of a girl, where the results are generally favorable, she is able to relate deeply to the father, but is able to relax that relation and relate again on a more mature level to the mother. This helps to break the closest infantile dependency on each, helps to create the basis for a wholesome conscience, and aids the girl in taking the feminine role in later life. And conversely, where the girl cannot live through this act of the drama to a favorable outcome, she may remain too close to either the mother or the father, may prove to have a morbid conscience, and may be handicapped in taking up the feminine role as youth and woman. In the third act of the drama of childhood, the child begins to encounter the world of persons and things outside his family. Obviously, his encounter with this world beyond the family does not ordinarily wait until this time, but now increasingly he begins to enter the outer world for longer periods in the day and in situations where he is temporarily cut off from his family, as in playgroups, school, church, and so on. It is as if the stage of his life were expanding, with doors opening onto the stage on every side, with people and yet more people pouring in around him. Hence, in this act of the drama, his character need is to learn to relate to persons outside the family. This need presents a child with two demands: learning to relate to persons of about his own age, especially to those of the same sex, and learning to relate to persons who have or who assume some kind of authority over him. The results of the solutions found in the first two acts of the drama begin to be more apparent as soon as the child goes out into this enlarging stage. Consider how true this is. First, in the case of the child who has been able to live through the earlier acts of the drama comparatively well. He is capable of relating to other persons with relative ease and confidence. If he has been able to pass beyond an infancy relation to his parents, boy is better able to encounter boy, and girl to encounter girl, with a fair degree of assurance and without morbid needs of boy for boy and girl for girl. We say of such a child, he gets on well with other children, or he has many friends. Such a child, having been able to relate well to his own parents, is the more likely to relate well also to other persons in authority. For if the persons in authority, as he encounters them, are capable for their part of taking a friendly and not a bullying role, this child can intuitively trust that person, such as teacher, policeman, guard, and so on. This child, then, is likely to be able to pass into the life of boys or the life of girls, school life and church life, as a cooperative person, able to take the gaff, able to conform to reasonable rules without resentment, presenting few serious behavior problems, and in no way a prig or a sissy. But if a child has come out of the earlier acts of his drama with still unsolved problems in his relations with either or both the parents, he enters the third act handicapped for the wider human relations which now open to him. Insecure, basically, it is only natural that he should now experience fresh insecurity in relations with other children. The forms in which this insecurity may express itself are legion. He may be in more or less constant conflict with other children, as in snatching, taking their things, bullying, picking on them, or hurting them. Or he may take up a morbid dependence, weaker boy on stronger boy, weaker girl on stronger girl, or he may retreat from other children, shrinking away from the play because it is too rough, shrinking from participation with his group because they are mean, bad, or nasty. He may become the prig who is better than his comrades, or the sissy who can't take it and stays at home. Persons in authority are intuitively felt as a threat. Perhaps he requires an inordinate amount of attention from them, forever running to teacher or forever seeking the protection of the police, or instead he fights against authority, finding ways to outwit it, defying it, calling it down on his head, and in general setting himself against it with the greatest ingenuity. And he can do this whether it makes him a hero or an outcast in the eyes of his peers. Throughout the childhood of an individual, there is a two-way confrontation constantly going on within a family. The parents on their side are confronted by the fact of the child and the demands for their growth which this living fact lays upon them. But the child on his side is confronted, as we have said, by his parents with such degree of adequacy and such view of life as they have achieved. Let us now examine this latter confrontation a little more closely, seeking to get at its meaning in terms of religion. Many writings and discussions of religion in childhood appear to be based on two assumptions. First, that the teaching of religion begins at about the time a child is learning to talk. And second, that the content of that teaching is largely or entirely under the control of the person or persons who teach the child. One then proceeds perhaps to consider such points as the words in which the teaching shall be put, the attitudes to be cultivated, the habits to be developed, and so on. To express the matter in the baldest form, it is as if we said, control what goes on by way of verbal teaching, then control what comes out by way of words and actions, and you have taught religion. So choose the time when you can commence to do this, determine what and how you wish to teach, and then begin. Put in this oversimple way, it is obvious that one is failing to reckon sufficiently with the dynamic self of the child, which intervenes between the teaching and the outcome. But if we are to take due account of the dynamic self which intervenes between religion presented and religion responded to, we must seek for the laws or principles which govern the way that dynamic self acts. The principle which governs the dynamic self in this respect can be stated, we believe, in some such way as this. The emotional life of the individual as infant and child determines the kind of religion which he can respond to and make his own. The dynamic factors which confront the infant are the dynamic factors outside of him, and these begin to create the dynamic self within him. These dynamic factors ordinarily come to him first through his parents. We can recognize these dynamic factors in their simplest, strongest form as love and hate. And now, let it be said at once, and again in the simplest possible terms, that when the infant encounters love, he encounters God. And the nature of the dynamic self, which he is becoming, determines, we've already said, the kind of religion to which he can respond and make his own. His response in his faith, or his shrinking back, as his case may be. What theology refers to as saving faith may begin at so early an age that no one dares to place its lowest limits in terms of age. If a child encounters warm and genuine parental love, if the parental view of life does not seriously distort the claims of God on human life, if the religious teaching presents Jesus Christ so as to awaken the response of love and trust, then who is to say how early a child may be of the kingdom of God? Yet it is easy to see, on the other hand, that in many cases the dynamic self, being what it is, may hold a child back from an outgoing response to religious teachings or to the church unless and until some fresh confrontation in later years disturbs or even shatters the existing self and sends it groping in hunger for what it has hitherto denied or rejected. But in any case, where faith can be said to exist, we must reckon with all the possible discolorations which the dynamic self is capable of giving. For example, to God, Jesus Christ, the Bible, the church's teaching, and so on, as one encounters them. This capacity of the dynamic self to select and distort the materials which one encounters in the religious confrontation seems to be rooted in childhood. Thus, as we already have seen, a child who is emotionally deprived may, when he enters the church school, have difficulty in relating to other children and may withdraw or present behavioral problems. That is, he is handicapped at the outset in entering into and participating in Christian fellowship, which is one of the distinctive characteristics of the Christian church. The drama of childhood has its sequel in the drama of adolescence. In the former, the central problem was individuation. In adolescence, the central problem is that of becoming psychologically weaned from the parents. The nature and degree of the weaning, which is achieved during adolescence, have much to do with the kind of growth which can take place within the adolescent years and with the later adequacy of the individual for the more mature responsibilities of adulthood. It will be recalled that we spoke of the child as encountering the world of persons, of things, of gender, and of persons of the same sex. The child enters into adolescence with whatever solutions and whatever blocking he may have already achieved, such as in his relation to persons, especially his own mother and father, in his relation to things, in his relation to himself as an I who knows himself, has a gender, and begins to pass moral judgment on himself through his conscience, in his relation to others of the same sex, and in his relation to authority. He takes with him to whatever of faith or of shrinking back there may be in his response to love, to the parental view of life, to formal religious teaching, and to the church. In short, the dynamic self which he has become by the time of adolescence moves on to a still broader stage. Whatever has been well achieved in his character is now his ally. What has been poorly achieved or blocked in character is his handicap until he can secure release. It appears further, as we saw, that the most basic element in this dynamic self, emerging from childhood, is the relation with his own mother and father. And now, the quality of that relation to the parents is to be still further tested by the manner and the degree in which he can wean himself from them. The test itself is presented to him in nature by two great confrontations during adolescence. Both of these are still essentially in the world of persons. The first is the world of persons of the opposite sex. The second is the world of history in the broadest sense, the present in its relation to the past and to the future. We may consider these in that order. Long before adolescence, of course, a child is conscious both of gender and of sex. During later childhood, however, it is common for boys to be indifferent or even hostile to girls, and vice versa. But with the onset of puberty, the physical changes taking place in the body begin to be profoundly felt in the psyche. The new element that is arising within the dynamic self causes one to become intensely aware of the new element that is arising also outside of him in persons of the opposite sex. Thus, and now in a new sense, deep begins to call to deep. The wonder and the beauty of this call, which resounds through so much of animate nature, touches one of the profoundest chords in man. In adolescence, youth begins intuitively to understand that in due time he must answer that call. In his answer eventually to be a yes or a no, and what manner of yes or of no is it to be? As with gender, so with sex. It is from nature, but it is more. In its deepest aspects, it is a religious confrontation, for as the question of marriage begins to become personal, it is seen to involve two crucial demands upon love, a union and a separation. Both these demands upon life are rooted in the religious conception of marriage. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and the two shall be one flesh. But it cannot escape notice that the demand to leave is prior to the demand to cleave. Now there is a sense in which the whole drama of adolescence, as far as one's relation to persons of the opposite sex is concerned, represents the anticipatory working out of an individual's struggle between two competing claims upon love, namely, the demand to continue to cleave to the parents and the demand to be able to cleave eventually to the mate. So, the adolescent crisis in the emotional life is a crisis not merely of a particular episode, but rather it is a crisis extending over several years during which he becomes prepared to solve in some fashion the rival claims of the parents and of the mate for the deepest love which he is capable of giving. We may think of the drama of adolescence as having three acts, embracing the periods of early, middle, and late adolescence respectively. As far as ages are concerned, the first act corresponds roughly to junior high school, say about 12 to 14, the second to senior high school, say 15 to 17. But as we shall see, the third act is often greatly prolonged. In typical American families, a youth is living with his parents during the first and second acts, and perhaps during the third. Commonly, he is more or less dependent on them economically. His capacity to release himself psychologically from the parents and toward persons of the opposite sex cannot be known until the third act or even later. But during youth, one may discern certain general types of response which suggest how the struggle is going at a given time during the second or third act. 4 such types will illustrate the point. First, there is the youth who is able to relate easily to many persons of the opposite sex. Basically secure in his own emotional life, he does not have to bid for warmth of feeling by offering either things or sex in return for friendship. Young people are intensely aware of the value of such a personality. They often express it by saying such things as he or she can make friends because he can be a friend. Having many friends, he is the more prized as a friend. If he is capable of relating deeply as well as easily, falling in love can be more than a matter of accidental nearness. It can also truly involve the element of choice. Then there is the affect-hungry boy or girl. Not having experienced deep and sufficient love in the early years, in adolescence it is easier to confuse the desire for physical expression with love, of which it may become the deepest symbol. not being basically secure in one's own emotional relations, it is easy to bid for love with the symbol of love. Lonely and inexperienced in deep, healthy human relations, one may easily mistake passion in the partner for love and regard a promise as evidence of sincerity. Some, so situated, snatch very young at marriage as an escape from intolerable home relationships. Others may be drawn irresistibly into sexual relations before marriage. Some are left as stranded victims of pregnancy or disease. Still others, insatiable, run the gamut of every conceivable physical expression, burning with lust but never knowing love. If one is to place any confidence in such widely publicized statistical studies as those of Kinsey and others, he is fairly entitled to read the results as being partly a symptom of emotional starvation in the earlier life of American youth. Again, as a third type, there are the youths who continue to keep their friendships largely or wholly within the limits of their own sex, boy with boys, girl with girls, during the second or even third acts of the drama of adolescence. And as a fourth type, there are the youths who have few, if any, friends either among their own or the opposite sex. In any case, where youth holds back from warm and natural friendships among the opposite sex, the reasons may be obvious or they may be obscure. The most obvious reason in many instances is lack of opportunity for knowing many persons of the opposite sex. The second great confrontation of the adolescent to which we referred is the world of history. By history, we do not mean simply the subject which is given that title in the school curriculum. We mean rather the total stream of man's experience and achievement as it surrounds us in the present, as it comes to us out of the past, and as it bears us onward into the future. History in this broad sense includes, for example, the culture we live in, the visible evidence of our strivings as seen in homes, cities, industries, and government, our sciences and our practical techniques for getting things done, the literature and the philosophies which we keep alive, interpretations of the past which we commonly call history, the traditions which we cherish, our interpretation of the present world scene, the dangers we regard as most threatening, the attempts we make to foretell the future, the measures we count on to protect us in the future. The parents, for their part, may feel themselves to be within a longer family line, reaching back generation after generation with the accumulating traditions and the cherished values which happen to belong to a particular family line. Family traditions vary greatly, of course, and individual parents may vary just as greatly in the value or the lack of it which they attribute to a family line. But in many cases, as a child enters adolescence, it is as if the parental view of life, with its pressures upon the young, now begins to be reinforced by the longer family view of life with still greater pressures. You don't dare do that, James, because, reminder, you are a Purvis. Or, son, I must say I am shocked at the interest you are showing in that Weiser girl. Remember, you are an Andrews. Or, I am pleased with your record this term, but I am sure you can do better. Or, I can't imagine what's getting into you, son. Who ever heard of a Cosman holding views like that? Sounds to me perfectly scandalous to hear any member of our family talk like that. The strength and the persistence of family tradition can be well seen in concrete instances. This may be done by examining actual transmitted patterns of family life. By transmitted patterns of family life, we mean some observable, definable way of meeting life which appears more or less unchanged, generation after generation within a family line. Obviously, it is easiest to find material where only 2 generations are concerned. Since parents and children living together in one household are so common a feature in our ordinary life, it will be increasingly difficult to find our material as the number of generations increases, for the reason that intimate and detailed knowledge of any one family line becomes more difficult to obtain in proportion as the number of generations increases. Youth encounters the broader world of history in the sense to which we have already alluded, he is being introduced to the great society of man, with its present and with its relation to the past and the future. The channels through which the great society makes its impact upon youth vary with the individual, of course, but one thinks especially of such common examples as the community, the school, the college or university, radio and television, movies, sports, newspapers, reading which one chooses for himself, travel, economic cycles, the clash of ideologies, strikes, laws, agents, and agencies of government, and organized religion in its Jewish, Protestant, Roman Catholic, and numerous other forms. Running through it all is social stratification into caste and class. And lowering over it all is war, as a factor in the past, or war as present threat, or war as present experience, or war in its aftermath. Through these and scores of other channels, the great society thrusts itself in upon a youth, requiring that he come to terms with this or that aspect of the total world of actual history. And now we should also consider the pressure placed upon youth to orient himself by a secular view of life at the very period of his own existence, when typically he is trying to wean himself from his parents and find a place for himself in the great society. Secularism derives much of the weight of its pressure from its pervasiveness, for it invades every phase of life. Since it is so familiar, perhaps no one as yet is able to assess its true import in the actual world of history, or to say what is more and what is less significant among its influences. But out of all the pressures which secularism exerts upon youth, we may single out four that appear to have crucial significance in the development of the self at the time of psychological weaning. They are crucial in the sense that they present a crisis, or more correctly, a series of crises, during the weaning period. One of these is the pressure of secular values. By its own nature, secularism neglects or rejects the cosmic and eternal order as a frame of reference in arriving at a sense of values, and restricts itself to the order of nature, particularly to the here and now. In practice, and again in the presence of youth, secularism often reverses the order. Secularism itself is in conflict as to what the primary values are within the order of nature. In its sharpest form, the conflict is between humanism and materialism, human values and material values. In its confessions of faith, especially in the presence of the young, secularism often puts human values uppermost, for example, in such terms as human freedom, human happiness, peace, welfare, health, and so on. A common theme is make money. Make it honestly if you can, but make money. Another pressure is secularism in education. We are not referring now to the separation of church and state, nor to the consequent development of two systems of education, one called secular and the other called religious. Rather, the feature of the present situation which here claims attention is the pressure of secularism as felt in all education. For it would seem that secularism tends to invade every kind of education, whatever label the particular branch or level or type of education may happen to wear, and whether offered by the state or the church or private individuals or chartered corporations. In the extent to which this is so, the young are kept preoccupied with objects, facts, problems, processes, interpretations, advantages, and so on, which lie within the order of nature. To that extent, it can be said that secular education is education in naturalism, whoever conducts it, and by the same token, to that same extent, the young are screened off from awareness of the cosmic and eternal order with its claims upon human life. A third pressure upon youth is that of secular authority. As a youth seeks to wean himself from his parents, he finds himself confronted by numerous portions and representatives of the great society who claim authority over him and press their demands upon him. Here we limit our thought to the authority of the state. It is true we are now considering the case of youth who are not yet of age, but modern history has shown how quickly the state, or even a mere handful of men, can sweep the youth of an entire nation into any frame of mind or any course of action. The underpinning of the secular authority of the state lies in the sense of nationalism and patriotism. The nation as one portion of the great society is presented to youth as the patria, the personalized fatherland or motherland. Typically it takes on some of the characteristics of a father, writ very large. Youth is taught that it is the nation which has produced us and nourished us. The nation gave us our advantages, guarantees our liberties, and provides for us in our emergencies. It protects us from our enemies, and we must protect it. The nation is all-powerful, has a glorious tradition, and has never been seriously in the wrong. And the young are taught that to the patria we owe patriotism, that is, love, loyalty, obedience, and conformity. But now, such as a child owes to a father, but such as a citizen owes to a sovereign. For the national state confronts youth as his sovereign within the great society. In the world of history, the church exists, and there it confronts youth. While yet a child, one may have known the church as an integral part of life, or as a casual part of it, or the church may have had no part at all in life as the youth has known it. But now, as he enters adolescence, the church takes on a potentially new and deeper significance for reasons which lie very close to the youth's own personal situation. For note, in the first place, that youth is in danger of being caught in the grip of an ironclad determinism and borne along by such forces as we have just been discussing. Many of the young feel this so keenly that they yield to a sense of a fate which they cannot alter and cannot avoid. For outwardly he is beset by heavy pressures to conform to the parental view of life, to the family traditions, to a secular view of life, and to the demands of the state. Inwardly, he is under pressure to wean himself and assert his own individuality rather than he was able to do as a child. But he is not certain what his own individuality is, and unless he can be helped toward a deeper self-discovery, he is in danger of being swept along either toward a sterile conformity to the heaviest pressure, whatever that happens to be, or else toward a futile rebellion against all pressures from every source. In either case, there is the possibility that a youth may become a sort of chronic adolescent, engaging hectically in living, yet stalemated by life, wanting more education, yet resisting it, resentful, yet still remaining dependent, growing older, but not growing up. But one is to be reminded in the second place that the grip of determinism is to be broken, not by exerting still heavier pressure from without, but by the formation of a new self within. Such a new self is not the result of a mere compromise between existing forces that play on one from without. It is a new force itself, which has come into being. In evolutionary terms, it is a new emergent. In religious terms, it is a new creation. A new self is called into being by love. And this ultimate fact in human experience was foreshadowed during childhood and youth, in one's relation with his parents, as far as may have been true in any given case. Later, it may also be foreshadowed even more richly in one's own marriage, yet at its best it is and must be love foreshadowed, not perfect love. Of this we spoke in the preceding chapter. But now in youth love, not love foreshadowed, but perfect love, confronts him from outside the secular plane as God. But as with human love, so too with the love of God in yet another respect. It cannot attain its highest creativity until it is responded to, and that is to say, the path to the deepest self-discovery and the utmost self-release lies within the twofold experience of knowing oneself loved with infinite love, and of giving love in return with all the heart, soul, mind, and strength. Thus the deepest that is within the universe is calling to the deepest in youth. It is the role of the church to present this call to youth as fact, as promise, and as claim. and in responding, the way begins to open out of natural determinisms and into free citizenship in the eternal order. In religious terms, the person who responds to the call of the Spirit enters the kingdom of God. We should distinguish between the kingdom of God and the church, for he will probably be a member of a church. The church is a society of persons, variously defined according to the polity of the particular communion. The kingdom of God is here understood as a relationship between God and the individual in which the sovereignty of God over the whole of life is asserted from the one side and either acknowledged or rejected on the other side. The church involves the authority of man over man, an authority variously conceived in the different branches of Christianity, but an authority of man nonetheless, and very responsive to the patterns and pressures that happen to prevail in human society. But the kingdom of God has to do with the authority of God, and of God only. If the two concepts, kingdom of God and church, are allowed to become indistinguishable, the pretensions and tyranny of the church may become more intolerable than those of the state. The kingdom of God is claim, then, as well as promise, the claim of the sovereignty of God over the individual. The church presents this claim to youth. And see again where this finds youth. The claims of his parents and of his family traditions tend to hold him within the family pattern. Tending to wean him from the family dominance are the relationships with the opposite sex, the anticipatory claims of love between man and woman, and the claims of secularism heading up eventually in the demands of the national sovereign state. A common pattern of response is that of rebellion. It can take the greatest variety of forms. It may, for example, be directed against the doctrines of the church, or some doctrine in particular may be taken up as a ground of offense. It may be rebellion against the church as a whole, or some particular denomination, or some particular congregation, or the services of the church in general, or one service in particular, or some custom in the service. Or it may be rebellion against the Christian code of conduct in general, or some one item in the code of morals may become a symbol of revolt. In all such rebellion, we may not rule out the possibility that this is direct revolt against God and his claims on human life, but neither, on the other hand, may we lightly dismiss the possibility that rebellion in the area of religion is aimed at the parents more than at God. For rebellion against religion may in some instances be adopted unconsciously as a central measure in freeing oneself from parental domination, or perhaps as a means of making a parent suffer. Suppose, for example, that a father is rigidly devoted to some particular article in a creed, an article which he regards as essential to salvation. Suppose further that this father is a powerful personality who seeks to dominate his son emotionally. In such a case, the son may lack the courage to rebel directly against the father, but his attitude toward the crucial article of the father's creed needs perhaps to be seen as a symptom of feelings toward the father, which can be best expressed indirectly. By rejecting or destroying what the father treasured, the son, it may be, is declaring a measure of independence, belittling an idol which the father had set up, and retaliating for suffering which a domineering father had caused. The variations on this theme which are possible are almost limitless in number. It should be clearly understood, however, that religious rebellion works in both directions. That is, there can be a rebellion of the young toward religion as well as against it. This appears to be happening to some extent in American life, for we find not at all infrequently that youth react away from a non-church family pattern and seek in the church something which they have not found in their homes. And that, too, is seeking a new dimension in which to be about my Father's business. Then there is a fourth pattern, that of no response, and this is the case for some because a religious interpretation of life and the religious claims upon life have never been encountered at all. For others, both interpretation and claim have left them non-committal. But in any event, these youth seek the fulfillment of life more or less completely within the secular plane, finding there, even in youth, a saga or a treadmill, as the case may be. He was tempted, young adulthood. As one leaves the period of youth, he is confronted by the world of adult life with its manifold responsibilities. He is placed under the demand to take up his own part as an adult in the emotional, economic, intellectual, social, and religious life of the world of his own day. The personal situation of the young adult is shaped to a large degree by the nature and extent of the weaning which he was able to achieve during adolescence. In actual life, there is every shade of variety in the weanings that take place. For the moment, however, we may think of those who are relatively well weaned psychologically by the time they have reached the early 20s, and of those who are not. Those who have not achieved a relatively full weaning continue in a sort of prolonged adolescence. They may remain immature, for example, in regard to emotional responsibility or economic responsibility or intellectual or social or religious responsibility. There's a shrinking back from meeting and carrying some one or many of these responsibilities at an adult level, and a lingering on in some kind of dependency relationship. For one may continue to be a dependent in any or all of these areas for an indefinite period of time, perhaps for his entire life. When the character development is arrested at the threshold of maturity, there are two typical possibilities. One is that life's encounters will even yet take one irresistibly on toward maturity, leading him perhaps by the hard way into a ripeness of character, not the less real because delayed beyond its appointed time. The other is that adolescence will become, as it were, a permanent state of mind beyond which no further advance will ever take place. Many who study modern civilization are disposed to lay a large part of the ills of our time at the door of prolonged immaturity, and to regard the wider prevalence of maturity as a requisite for social salvation. When examined critically, this turns out to be a secular thesis, for it finds both the ill and the remedy within the processes of nature. Maturity in and of itself is to be regarded as a healer. It is taken to be a necessary means of recovery from personal and social conditions which thwart and damage human life. That is to say, maturity, like reason and progress, comes to be regarded as means of salvation. But when the inherent limitations of the thesis are understood, the fact that prolonged immaturity is so common still constitutes a serious indictment of our culture. It should be seen as a symptom of the sickness of a society if that society becomes so complex and so terrifying that the young lose heart for growing up and prefer instead to remain protected even at the cost of being dominated by parents or parental substitutes. Let us now consider the case of those who have achieved enough of a weaning to permit them to begin passing beyond adolescence and toward maturity. As one moves out of adolescence, the central character problem is that of making the basic identifications around which his life as a mature adult can be developed. It is well to be reminded why this is an essential stage in a developing life. As already observed, the central problem of childhood is individuation. That of adolescence is psychological weaning. Thus, for some 2 decades, the individual is forming, but in proportion as he is able to wean himself, a fresh crisis awaits him. That crisis turns upon the question, how shall the individuality and the freedom that have been achieved be maintained? Will it be by cutting as many ties as possible, or will it be by forming ties of one's own and maintaining them at a mature level? Many are greatly attracted by the first of these alternatives, that is, cutting as many ties as possible and forming as few as possible in order to remain free. This has been a common response to life in modern times, for as the idea of individualism crept into common awareness, it was widely recognized that the way to individuality was made vastly more difficult by old customs and conventions, especially in family life, political life, and religious life. Hence it came to be commonly believed that the way to become an individual lay along the negative road, that is, the road of getting rid of this or that encumbrance, whether in the person's immediate environment or in the total social situation. The solitary individual became something of a hero. Thoreau, living alone at Walden Pond, became a symbol of the self-sufficiency which many longed to have, the more so as civilization grew more complex, and as the leveling influences in democracy began to be more apparent. So there began to be a cult of isolation. There was an isolation of the wilderness, such as that of Thoreau and the Western settler, who in folklore is said to live alone, talk little, and resent having a neighbor nearer than 10 miles away. This escape to the wilderness was impossible for most, however, except in imagination, fiction, and the like. But an actual escape into solitude proved to be possible in the very place where the number of people was the greatest, that is, in the modern city. And here, if anywhere in the world, one could, if he wished, become anonymous, cut all ties, escape all responsibility, and be himself to his heart's content. And then modern man was to discover that his isolation is more terrifying than the domination from which he sought to escape. This has come to be a common theme in recent times in literature of many kinds, but the intense feeling generated by isolation has nowhere been better expressed than by Dostoevsky, writing about 1880 in The Brothers Karamazov. He saw even at that time the terrible isolation which results from an uncorrected individualism. One of the characters in this book is a man who has killed another many years ago, but has gone undetected ever since. Now, he is in a period of crisis, as he seeks the solution for his own situation. Dostoevsky puts the following words into his mouth. Why, the solution that prevails everywhere, above all in our age, it has not fully developed, it has not reached its limit yet. For everyone strives to keep his individuality as apart as possible, wishes to secure the greatest possible fullness of life for himself. But meantime, all his efforts result not in attaining fullness of life, but self-destruction. For instead of self-realization, he ends by arriving at complete solitude. All mankind in our age have split up into units. They all keep apart, each in his own groove. Each one holds aloof, hides himself, and hides what he has from the rest. And he ends by being repelled by others and repelling them. He heaps up riches by himself and thinks, how strong I am now and how secure. And in his madness, he does not understand that the more he leaps up, the more he sinks into self-destructive impotence. For he is accustomed to rely upon himself alone and to cut himself off from the whole. He has trained himself not to believe in the help of others, in men and in humanity, and only trembles for fear he should lose his money and the privileges that he has won for himself. The alternative to cutting as many ties as possible is, as we have already observed, selecting, forming, and strengthening ties at the mature level. But while cutting ties may prove terrifying because of the isolation which results, the acceptance of ties may prove just as frightening because of the responsibilities which are involved. By way of meeting such a dilemma, the self may find some kind of compromise. A typical compromise for this purpose consists of striving to get that which we naturally and legitimately desire, but contriving to have someone else pay for it. The most serious temptations in young maturity, we may believe, have to do in some fashion sooner or later with this kind of compromise. For before the eyes of the young adult, the shop window of modern life is filled with alluring goods, and over the window is spread the invitation, take what you want and charge it to someone else's account. This temptation is made the more plausible by the fact that the other persons, too, have exactly the same natural and legitimate wishes as we. We can therefore identify with them, thus avoiding isolation, and at the same time, we may lighten or even evade our own responsibility because someone else, or the group, or the leaders of the group, will see things through they will pay. They will see that things do not go to pot. All of this may be expressed by saying that the typical temptation of young maturity is the appeal to such identifications as promise to give what is legitimately wished, but to give it in such a way as to let the responsibility be shifted to other shoulders. And now, in order to draw some of these threads together, let us consider certain major types of responsibility which confront the young man or woman. It will be observed that in each of these areas, life presents an adult responsibility and offers a basic identification suited to that type of responsibility. And yet, at the same time, tempts one to shift the responsibility to other shoulders, thus leaving some aspect of character frozen at the level of childhood or youth. The deepest claim of life upon the individual is that he should give and receive mature love. Love at a mature level might exist between any two, but the love which especially concerns us here is the love of an adult for his parents, for his wife or husband, should he marry, and for his child or children, should he become a parent. If one has been able to wean himself from his parents by the time he is an adult, his relation to his parents can be at a mature level. In that event, the son or daughter can achieve many kinds of independence, and yet the relation with the parents can contain such qualities as affection, devotion, consideration, respect, emotional support, comfortable comradeship, and many more of the same kind. If necessary, economic assistance or even support can then be given in either direction from parent to child or vice versa, without its being a threat to the relationship or a danger to self-respect. In entering the world of adults, one encounters the demand that he do his share of work so as to support himself and contribute to the world's values. An individual's sense of responsibility for work is one identification of the nature and degree of his maturity. For work is rooted in necessity. Thus, for example, work is an economic necessity. If the individual does not support himself or carry his fair share of work, someone else must do it for him. To the extent that he declines this responsibility, he is still at the nursing stage economically, living off someone else without contributing equably in return. Work is a psychological necessity because it lies very close to the roots of self-respect. If one does not work, he has in some manner to justify his idleness to himself and to others. And work is a social necessity because it requires work to enhance or even to maintain the world's stock of values, both material and non-material. And because work is a necessity, the recognition of that necessity and the assumption of a responsibility are in themselves among the signs of maturity. For it is a recognition of reality, and it is a way of saying that one asks for no special favors. But work is a problem as well as a necessity. It is so in many respects. Many cannot decide upon the kind of work for which they are fitted. Others know what they wish to do, but cannot find an opening in which to establish themselves in their chosen work. Then, periodically, there is no work of any sort to be found. Work is a problem again in that many kinds of work required in modern life are unrelieved drudgery, benumbing the mind and often impairing the body as well. Work is a problem again in the sense that one of the deepest rifts in the modern world has to do, in part at least, with the nature of work and with the kinds of work which are to be counted as worthy of respect. Communism, with its labor theory of value, holds that the only true values are material values, and that the only labor worthy of respect is that which produces material values. With one breath, it talks of a classless society, but with the next breath, it sings a new aristocracy, that of the worker. On the other hand, democracy, without minimizing either labor or material values, knows a category of value which seems to be alien to communism, and this is the category of non-material values, such as individuality, freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. But work of many kinds has for centuries been identified with disadvantaged classes, while work of other kinds has been identified with privileged classes. And the tragedy of the case now is that the Western democracies, although based to so large a degree on political and religious principles of the equality of persons, cannot even yet shake off the ancient distinctions between master and slave. So in the democracies, one's work still tends to give him a basic identification with a class. The labels for the classes change from time to time, but at present are recognizable under such terms as workers, management, owners, or capitalists. In the area of economic responsibility, the temptation is to avoid work for oneself and to live off the work of others in some form of dependency or exploitation. This temptation is the more subtle because there are ways of avoiding work which are respected and approved in one's own class, and this seems to be true no matter what the class to which one belongs. Thus, the worker can find the greatest variety of ways to squeeze his pay as high as possible and squeeze his output as low as possible. The employer can be equally ingenious in finding ways to do exactly the opposite, that is, to squeeze the highest possible output for the lowest possible pay. Or the temptation to avoid work may still take other forms. For instance, there is the temptation to avoid work altogether by living off society. Here the motto is, society owes me a living. And there is the temptation to live off the past, enjoying the returns from the accumulated labor and savings of other persons in other days. Love and money are two of the mightiest forces known in man's life. The basic temptation is strikingly alike in both. Get as much as you can and give as little in return as you can get away with. In speaking of social responsibility, we have in mind the individual's responsibility as a member of a group. For the young adult is confronted by an almost interminable list of social groups within the great society. There are persons, of course, who seek to live wholly apart from any group identification, but if an individual is weaned from his parents, his insufficiency emotionally and economically creates a powerful motive, perhaps an instinctive one, to identify with a group or groups. Let us here call identification with groups by the term social identification. Social identification becomes one of the major determinants in the development of character, partly for the reason that social responsibility can be developed and discharged in such a great variety of ways. A few typical patterns will illustrate the point and will at the same time show a few of the temptations which lurk within social identification. In one typical pattern of social identification, the group serves as a haven. And here the individual seeks the group out of motives which contain a large element of fear in some form, such as fear of loneliness or distrust of one's ability to cope with the world. The group then may serve either or both of two purposes. It bolsters and supports the anxious self, and in it one can lose his identity in time of danger. The group then becomes a sort of nirvana, or a social womb, into which the individual can retreat. Belonging, in such cases, means, to a greater or lesser extent, a surrender of will and conscience to the larger social self. In another typical pattern of social identification, the group attracts because it represents the self-interest of its members in a competitive society, and here the individual can take part in collective activity frankly designed to protect or advance the interests of one group within society, such as a particular class, or those following a particular trade, or practicing a particular profession, or those engaged in a particular industry or line of business, and so forth. The motives of the individual often include a large element of aggression, retaliation, and the like, which society would penalize if expressed individually, but accepts when expressed collectively. In a third pattern of social identification, the group serves as the vehicle for some particular type of social responsibility to the whole of society, or at least to some segment of it which is greater than the group itself. Here the motives are altruistic, that is, a disinterested seeking for the good of others through any appropriate channels. In this case, the group represents the enlarged giving of the self. Of course, these are by no means all the functions of social identification, but these illustrations will at least suggest that the group meets many needs of the individuals comprising it, such as the need for withdrawal from life, or the need for aggression, or the need to express love on a widening scale. And broadly speaking, any group may serve any of these three functions for a particular individual, although certain groups may by their own nature tend to serve one of these functions more than another. In a democracy, the individual encounters demands on his knowledge, opinion, and action in matters of general concern. If he is to be a responsible citizen, it is incumbent on him that he bear an intellectual responsibility. In the matter of knowledge concerning public affairs, the ordinary adult is at a great disadvantage, for the issues are complex and the information is abundant, but not readily secured. While much of the most vital information concerning matters of state, business, labor, and religion are withheld from the public. This being so, it is common for the individual to identify with some block in society. He tends to regard that block as a dependable purveyor of information and is likely to shape his opinion by that which prevails in the block. It then approaches the impossible for facts or opinions of a different stripe to penetrate the minds of the adherents of a block. Partly for reasons of this kind, we have the strange result that is extremely difficult in a democracy, just as truly as in a totalitarian state, to know or to disseminate the truth regarding politics, economics, social conditions, or religious affairs. The temptation for the individual is obvious. Surrender his mind and the directing of his action to his block. The principle is the same wherever the block exists. In politics, for example, one surrenders his mind and will, it may be to one of the political parties, derives his political information from approved sources, then acts and votes along party lines. The same kind of surrender may take place to a block in economic affairs, or in social life, or in intellectual or religious life. As one enters the adult period of life, he is confronted by the demand that he accept the responsibilities of religion and carry them at a mature level. If his earlier life has anesthetized him against the claims of religion, it is to be expected that now he will continue to ignore its demands as an adult. It may be, however, that he will not ignore religion, but will fight it. In that event, it is always possible that the individual has not yet settled matters inwardly as concerns the claims of religion. His fight against it then means that he still is interested, even though it is the interest of wishing to undermine or even to destroy religious tenets, a religious philosophy of life, religious institutions, or religious persons. Or again, he may encounter some other disturbing or shattering experiences of early adulthood which drive the self to seek for reorientation, or perhaps for rebirth and a wholly new beginning. Such a readiness for resurrection, that is, such a destroying of an old self with its complacencies, may come as a result of some overwhelming experience, as in times of personal tragedy or family tragedy or the social tragedies of war and revolution and the like. In this event, the individual of whom we are now thinking is seeking in adulthood, rather than in adolescence, a way to break out of the determinisms which threaten to crush him, and is seeking to become a new self who can be free in spirit in any environment. The church may serve some of the most important functions of a home in the case of young men and women who are not married. Here one thinks of certain, especially frequent personal situations. There is the young unmarried adult whose life is crowded, whose human contacts are abundant, and who is enjoying the heady wine of physical maturity, good health, good status, and freedom to do as he likes. There is need for perspective in the midst of great activity, for help in keeping major and minor values distinguished, and for a sense of comradeship in the striving for a morally worthy life. These needs the church should be able to supply. Then there are the young unmarried persons whose lives feel empty. In loneliness, it is easy to give up the moral struggle and coast, for who cares? Here, the simple yet profound need is for human comradeship and fellowship, not at the level of exploitation, but at that of genuine friendship. It surely is part of the church's role in the world to supply. The ancient but ever-renewed predicament of man is reached again by any individual who feels the moral demand to be perfect and who at the same time knows he is powerless to achieve that perfection. It is the function of Christianity to present to a man a way by which he can surmount that otherwise overwhelming dilemma. In Pauline doctrine, in those branches of Protestantism which understand and use the Pauline teaching, the solution is stated in terms of justification by faith. According to that doctrine, by his faith, the believer identifies with Jesus Christ, so that he is said to be in Christ, and he is accepted by God in all the warmth of a perfect father-child relationship. Not because he, the believer, is now a perfect person, but because of his identification with Jesus Christ. The doctrine of acceptance by God expresses in terms of theology precisely the same truth which we saw operating in a human family, namely, that the loving acceptance of a child by his parents is the only secure foundation for a healthy human self and for a wholesome conscience. But in theology, the meaning of acceptance is put in a cosmic and eternal framework and deals with man's relation to God. And this Pauline doctrine of the divine acceptance on the ground of human faith in the divine Redeemer gives the profoundest possible solution for the problem of man's conscience under the divine demand, for it permits, or rather it invites, repose of spirit in utter confidence, even while one is still embroiled in the moral struggle and while the actual personal perfection of character is still far from being achieved. And the church, when acting within the great Pauline tradition, can offer what we may call spiritual attainment. It offers this spiritual attainment as the gift of God, and not as anything which is subject to human control. But in the presence of this miracle of grace, the church has shown a tendency to be as restless as the magicians of Pharaoh in the presence of Moses. She seems to feel that she too must present to man her miracle of healing the soul of man. That is to say, the church finds it surprisingly difficult to offer a gospel whose power is all of God and is forever under the temptation to offer some kind of spiritual attainment or spiritual perfection which is subject to human control. Historically, there are 4 types of perfectionism which have been common, reappearing again and again in various forms. Indeed, they have appeared so often that we may call each of them a tradition within the total Christian stream. One of these is perfection of character. In this tradition, which began to form very early in Christian history, it is taught that perfect character can be attained during the early life. The terms used vary, but it has been taught again and again in the name of Christianity that the moral struggle can end by complete victory over sin. While still in the human body, one can be perfect, holy, sanctified, sinless. Repose of spirit is offered then in the present life as a blessing which awaits the successful outcome of the moral struggle. A second tradition is that of the perfect church. Here, a certain portion of the total company of Christian believers is presented as the only true church. Man is then offered a peculiarly favorable standing with God on condition that he enter the one true church or submit to it and entrust his eternal welfare to its keeping. He is told it may be that salvation is not possible outside this one true church and that all others are heretics. A third persistent tradition is that of the perfect creed. Here one is offered perfection of spiritual attainment in the realm of his beliefs. One is a true Christian only if he subscribes to certain articles of belief. Faith, then, is not so much a matter of personal relation to God through Jesus Christ, as it is a relation to an objective body of doctrine. In this tradition, one is acceptable to God because his faith is sound, by which it is meant that he signifies his assent to certain beliefs. A fourth persistent tradition is that of the perfect Christian experience. In this instance, the individual at some crisis in his life has had an experience of divine grace, which ever afterward seems to him as his one glorious hour. It was so high an experience that he feels he can never again attain it, so perfect that he has no hope of duplicating it, much less of ever transcending it. He then begins to hark back to that hour as a kind of watershed. He dates all events of the soul as they fall before conversion or after conversion. Before the revival or after the revival, that is, before or after he experienced a profound sense of forgiveness or an inrush of enabling power. But, and this is the spiritual tragedy of such a case as we have in view, he feeds upon his past, measures his present standing before God by his own happy day, and basically lacks the faith to believe that a still greater measure of the same grace may yet be vouchsafed to him. The church serves a function which we may call that of enlargement. This, too, is brought about as a result of identification. For when the individual identifies with a group, the self is in a better position to expand, both because of what the self does and because of what is done to it in the group. Thus we may speak not only of a dynamic self, but also of a dynamic group. And the dynamic group is capable, among other things, of strengthening and enlarging the otherwise insufficient selves who become part of it. The function of the church as a group in the lives of persons coming into maturity is, or may be, of deep significance. It is especially so in two typical situations. One is the case of the young man or woman who senses an insufficiency in his personal life or in his marriage, but who is capable of rapid maturing of character even under great difficulties. In such a case, the dynamics of group experience can often supply stimulations, support, and appreciations which would otherwise be lacking. Another typical case is that of the young couple with their first child or a family of young children. The experiences of parenthood are likely to stir up a sense of personal insufficiency in many areas of living, and the feelings of need aroused in early parenthood are among the most common influences leading young men and women to deepen or to renew their relationship with the church. To these young persons, then, the church may become an enlargement of their own personal selves or of their family group. The kingdom of God is his kingship or sovereignty over man. The church and the kingdom of God are not identical, but it is one of the functions of the church to be the scene where man is confronted by the claims of the kingdom of God, that is, by God himself and his moral demands as sovereign over human life. We have sought to show the remarkable cunning with which man contrives to avoid or to blunt the edge of those divine demands on the moral life. It's not merely that he forgets God or runs actively away from God, though he may indeed do both of these, but it cannot be too often emphasized that man has learned to be more subtle than the Elijahs and the Jonahs who sought a geographical escape. For we have discovered how to take the very weapons in the arsenal of religion itself, especially theology and even the church, and use them as shields to ward off the radical claims of God upon us men and our living. Thus, a degenerative process is always latent and often active in the church itself. And the corrective to this degenerative process is the Word of God in its twofold form. Jesus Christ, the living Word, and the Scripture as the written Word. So the church is, above all others, the place where the Word of God is allowed to confront man, speaking its own message, undiluted and unscreened. The church can then become spokesman for God to those who know their own inadequacy, who desire the healing of the self down to its deepest foundations, and who are willing to face not merely the word of man, but the word of God, with whatever it may promise and whatever it may require. This confronting of man by the living God, who speaks through his word, is at the core of the church's business in the world. It is the basis of moral leadership in a world of moral confusion and compromise. And young adulthood is a peculiarly strategic time for the undiluted moral demands of a holy God to confront the human soul, especially in the case of those who are mature enough to understand their meaning, but not yet so deeply encrusted with convention that they dare not obey. But only the poor in spirit can endure to face this ministry of the church, for this is not a ministry of comfort, but rather a ministry of high calling. It cannot be borne by the proud, for it would take away the root and ground of religious pride, which is the most deadly form of pride, and it would leave the religionist naked of soul in the very house of God where he had taken shelter against God. But for those who come in poverty of spirit, knowing their need and being willing to be silent in order that God may speak, for them there is peace in God's acceptance as they are, and a readiness to take the next step of the pilgrimage toward what they might become or do. The burning bush. We now have in view a period of some 2 decades of middle life reaching, say, from about 30 to about 50 years of age. In the case of an individual, this period presents a mass of biographical detail with which we cannot here be concerned, and when larger numbers of persons are taken into account, there is a wide range of differences between individuals. We must pass by these also, for here, just as when dealing with the earlier periods of life, we are seeking for the central problem of character, which we may regard as common to all men, however divergent they may be in other respects. It will be recalled that we have spoken of 3 central problems in the development of character in the earlier stages. These were, first, becoming an individual, second, becoming weaned from the parents, and third, making one's mature identifications and assuming his mature responsibilities. And now, in an equally summary manner, we may say that in middle life, the central problem of a developing character is to achieve a mature view of life and the universe. One's view of life and the universe, as we use that term, is the meaning which he finds in all that has confronted him. It is what we often refer to as a man's philosophy of life. In this matter of a philosophy of life, it is quite possible that we are dealing with an activity of the mind which is exactly as instinctual as growth itself, for the making of a philosophy of life is the self striving to relate, not to the parts, but to the whole. It is a striving to relate not now merely to persons, or things, or to society and the flux of human events, or the world of adult life, but rather to the totality of all that has been, or is now, or ever shall be. To speak in this fashion makes it sound as if a philosophy of life were a very complicated matter, requiring vast mental powers either to compose or to grasp. Not necessarily so at all. The most important philosophies of life have two great marks. They are profound, but they are simple. A philosophy of life which has any considerable significance is somewhat like a pass key. It can be seen in one glance. It can be accurately described in a few minutes. But put it to work, and the longer we use it, the more doors we find it will open, until finally we find it gives us access to every part of the house. The impulse to make a philosophy of life seems to be as old as self-conscious man, and certainly is a part of life as we know it today. Two examples, one from antiquity and one from our own time, will illustrate the point. The first example may be taken out of Jewish life. It is said that every Jewish rabbi in ancient times was expected to sum up the wisdom of his entire life in one brief saying, which he would teach to his disciples and which they would then treasure as the gist of what they had learned from him. A large number of these sayings have been preserved and make up the tractate known as Aboth, or the Fathers, which is in the Babylonian Talmud. This little book, then, contains a series of brief, pithy philosophies of life, each one the final garnering after years of mature reflection on the meaning of things. The second example comes out of the observation of a modern university professor, Erwin Edman of Columbia. In his semi-autobiographical Philosopher's Holiday, has a chapter on philosophers without portfolio. In this he relates story after story of persons whom he has known, outside of academic circles, who were seeking to reduce their philosophy of life to form. Some had achieved it and could put their philosophy in a few crisp phrases. Others, more ambitious, were still struggling. Typical of the latter is the businessman who spends a good part of his leisure trying to get a book written on a theme which he feels is vital, and then spends another generous share of time and of money as well in getting it published and circulated. Now, one certainly does not wait until middle age to begin forming his philosophy of life. As young man or woman, as youth, as child, even as infant, one is intuitively seeking the formula with which he can cope with life as life confronts him. The formula is the way, the pattern of character, which one actually uses in trying to cope with life. The formulation is the way he consciously explains his formula. His view of life, as already said, is the meaning he finds in all that confronts him. That is, in the totality of what he has been trying to cope with. His view of life, or his philosophy of life, if one prefers to call it that, is the interpretation which he gives to the whole of things in light of the formula he has developed as a way of dealing with a part of the whole. It is useful, furthermore, to distinguish between a spontaneous philosophy of life and an acquired philosophy of life. A spontaneous philosophy of life springs out of one's own formulation and one's own formula for coping with life. An acquired philosophy of life, on the other hand, is one which we have been taught. It sprang in the first instance out of the formulations and formulas of other people, and it may or may not correspond with our own spontaneous philosophy. It will be seen, then, that in considering a philosophy of life, we have to reckon with at least 4 levels in the character structure. To take them in the order in which they might meet the eye, as we come to know a person, they might be somewhat as follows. The acquired philosophy, the meaning which one has been taught to give to life and the universe. This is something one is said to hold, profess, support, defend, and so on. The spontaneous philosophy. The meaning we actually give to life in the universe as it confronts us and as we deal with it day by day. The formulation. The way we explain ourselves to ourselves and others at the level of conscious thought and of speech. The formula. The dynamic pattern of character which we actually use in striving to cope with life, largely a matter of feeling and emotion, and largely hidden from one's self-awareness. Let us now illustrate briefly the kind of character material which the first three layers might contain in one individual, and the consequent reverberations in the fourth layer, that is, in his acquired philosophy of life. It must be understood, of course, that such an illustration as this is schematic and greatly oversimplified, and that the number of possible variations is very great. In this illustration, we start at the bottom. Let us suppose that the basic formula in some given person is aggression. He meets life by attacking it. He gets his way, or tries to, by shoving, dominating, threatening, using force, making people uncomfortable, putting them on the defensive, making them suffer, and so on. This has been his basic formula from a very early age. As he tries to explain himself to himself and to others, his formulation may take any one of many possible shapes. Suppose, for example, that he can only understand himself by believing that people generally are aggressive toward him. The world as he feels it is full of enemies, full of hate, full of danger. He feels there is abundant cause for suspicion and fear. His spontaneous philosophy of life might conceivably take either one of two general directions. He might interpret the universe in terms that emphasize its unfriendliness, its danger to human interests and values and so forth. If his philosophy of life is a religious one, he may feel God as threat, jealousy, anger, wrath, and the like. And these may prove to be feelings of so deep-rooted nature as to defy any reasoning which would lead to a different conclusion. Or he might interpret his fate in the world as one whose highest duty is to fight something. What he is to fight will vary and change with the passing of his years, but he must find something to fight. In a word, a flaw in his character has been canonized and has now become a virtue in his philosophy. Then suppose, furthermore, that he has been subject to teaching and has acquired a religious philosophy of life which holds that mature love is essential to human well-being. As that basic principle is elaborated into a system, he can understand it intellectually, but not emotionally. His real God, it may be, will still be a God of wrath, and it is quite within the range of possibility that, professing a religious love, he will express that love by attacking men or doctrines or movements in the name of his religion. If he's a minister, he probably devotes much of his energy to working against this or that. He derives deep satisfaction from taking a stand on a matter. He is much given to denouncing evil, assuring us that he loves the sinner and hates only his sin, and he has much to say in praise of the prophet, the need for a prophetic ministry and the like. Now, our especial concern in this chapter is not merely with a philosophy of life, but with achieving maturity in one's philosophy of life. We should therefore seek for factors that determine the degree of maturity which one achieves in his philosophy of life. Three of these may be especially called to attention, namely the depth from which basic formula springs. Integrity. The common attempt in middle life to work out one's own statement of his philosophy of life is an effort to get rid of the discrepancy between one's character and one's philosophy, and thus reach integrity. Where it exists in a given individual, it may fairly be regarded as a sign of inward striving to achieve wholeness or unity within the self. The quest for integrity may take the individual in the direction of a more profound philosophy of life, in contrast with a less profound one, where he has hitherto rooted himself. The more profound view of life is also a more mature view of life. On the whole, a movement in the direction of greater maturity and deeper foundations tends to be a regenerative type of experience, for one goes deeper down into reality in search of truth and security. On the other hand, the quest for integrity between one's spontaneous and the various philosophies of life may take him in the direction of a less profound and less mature view of life. And this kind of shift in the foundations of the self tends on the whole to be a degenerative type of experience, for one abandons the more profound basis of selfhood for the less. The agape love is a love of which the New Testament speaks. It is considered a mature love to which the modern psychiatry refers. Now, even as late as middle life, a movement of the self toward integrity at this level is a regenerative experience, and a movement away from it is a degenerative one. In biblical terms, this shift, even in middle life, to the profoundest foundations of being is variously referred to as becoming as a little child, returning to the mother's womb, being born again when one is old, a death and resurrection of the self, and so on. It is an experience which maturing adults have sought in religion as far back as we have any knowledge of the history of religion, and Christianity offers the possibility that it can happen to anyone at any age. A third factor determining the degree of maturity in one's view of life is the individual's capacity to deal with unanticipated reality. This capacity is illustrated with remarkable symbolism in the account of Moses in the burning bush. It is a story in which three things stand out as having a special interest for our present line of thought. For one thing, it's the story of a man in middle life who had worked out his niche. He had his job to do, and everything indicates that by this time he had developed a philosophy of life which had sustained him through luxury, then through danger, and now held him together in the monotonous routine of a commonplace life. But in the second place, he was confronted by a fact which would not fit into his philosophy. To disregard the fact, rush past it, and protect his view of life from any further disturbance, or else to stop, look the thing squarely in the face, and if necessary, let it take him into a deeper philosophy of life which could deal with this unanticipated reality. That was his choice, and he chose the latter. Then third, and in consequence, he was invited to plumb a depth of reality which hitherto he had never known. Most significantly, this deeper penetration into reality had to do with the nature of being, particularly the personal being of God. I am that I am. The possible parallel to the life of any man or woman in modern times hardly needs to be pointed out. The burning bush is our confrontation in middle life by some fact or condition or situation which does not fit our view of life. In the moment of that confrontation, one of the gravest temptations of middle life is upon us, whether to protect such peace of mind as our view of life yields us and hurry past the unanticipated burning bush, or else to cling to an inadequate view of life, trying to curtain off from sight and mind whatever will not fit it, counting the safety of even a poor harbor better than the perils of the open sea. What is the burning bush? It may be any one of many things that will not fit the view of life which one has worked out by middle age. It is, for example, monotony when one had reckoned on a life filled with interesting experience. Or it is a catastrophe, sharp, crushing, terrifying, which befalls the beloved or oneself, or falls across the wider landscape. Or it is adversity when one had counted on comfort. Or it is discovering to one's dismay that the self does not fit the role into which it has been drawn. Or it is discovering that God, as He is, does not fit the neat theology we had constructed. In any and all such times, the basic question which confronts us in the burning bush is this: is one ready, as yet, to know God as He is? into thy hands. We are now to consider the portion of life from about 50 years of age onward. The line which marks off middle life from old age is quite indistinct. It varies greatly as between different individuals, and even within the individual. It is common now to distinguish many different kinds of age. For example, a person might be 50 years old chronologically. Biologically, however, he might be at a much greater age, with one or more organs of his body nearly worn out. But psychologically, he might still be quite young in the sense that very little had ever happened to him. Emotionally, he had never lived very far out into the stream of life. Obviously, these three kinds of age, chronological, biological, and psychological, could be found in every possible combination in one person, and still other kinds of age could be identified. But approaching the subject of that manner often leads to a rather fruitless discussion of the time when one is called to be old. Let us simply say that we have in view the situation of those who have reached or passed the milestone of half a century. And it seems more frank to refer to them simply as the old, or as older people. In each of the earlier periods which we have considered, we have sought to identify the central problem of character development. Thus we have discussed individuation, weaning from parents, establishing basic identifications, and achieving a mature view of life as being central problems of character in childhood, youth, young maturity, and middle life, respectively. And now, after the same fashion, we may say that the central problem of character in age is simplification. In Chapter 1, we spoke of the final stage in human development as achieving simplification of life in its physical, material, and spiritual aspects, so that the soul may, with less and less impediment, progress toward its chosen destiny. And by the term simplification of life, we mean distinguishing the more important from the less important, getting rid of the less important or relegating it to the margin, and elevating the more important to the focus of feeling, thought, and action. The standard by which the individual distinguishes between more important and less important is contained within his philosophy of life, especially in his spontaneous, as compared with his acquired philosophy. This being so, simplification of life in old age can be expected to be thoroughgoing or superficial, depending upon the level at which the person's view of life had been worked out in his earlier years. Thus, for example, if by middle age one's view of life consisted essentially of a materialistic philosophy, then in old age it can be expected that the individual will contrive some way to elevate things into a sort of final sacramental act at the close of his life. We shall illustrate the point later. It is to be borne in mind that a final simplification of life at a more profound level than one has lived in throughout his earlier years is quite within the range of possibility at any point during these final decades. Indeed, in some societies, as in the Far East, it is an accepted thing that one should radically simplify his life in the direction of spiritual values in his latter years. And in Western culture, some persons do essentially the same thing, but the inertia of habit is great. And until very recently, it was something of a Western folk ideal that a man should die in harness or die with his boots on. That is to say, one hoped to drive himself in the old familiar direction until death overtook him and he dropped in his tracks. But it may well be true that this folk ideal of the West is changing under our very eyes, and that the world of history as it unfolds is confronting the old with a few more years of life, and for the first time, a little decent leisure in which to simplify life in its closing stage. What is meant will perhaps become more apparent as we consider aspects of life as the old now encounter them in the modern world. The old now are beginning to constitute a sort of new continent in the modern Western world of population, and this is true as to their life expectancy, their number and proportion in the population, and their role in society. As to expectancy, the median or average age in the United States has been rising steadily for a century and a half, and is expected to continue to rise. In 1800, the median age was approximately 16 years. In 1900, it was about 23 years. In 1945, it was about 29.7 years. The proportion, as well as the absolute number, is increasing, and a 45 to 55% increase in the proportion of the population 65 years and above is expected in the future. The new place coming to be held by older people in modern society is shown in too many ways to permit even mentioning all of them here, but socially, politically, and economically. They constitute a new force to be reckoned with, and in many respects a new problem to be solved. To science, they have yielded a new field of inquiry called gerontology, or the study of aging. In medicine, they have required a new field of specialization called geriatrics, or the care and cure of the aged. In organized religion, they have confronted the churches with the question of how their needs may best be served by pastors and congregations. Now, this new continent of population might be examined from many points of view, as is quite fittingly being done in current discussions, projects, and writings. But in this connection, we wish to make only 2 points that stand out. The first is that the world of history is presenting to individual man a few more years of life and leisure. And second, this prolonged final span tends to be a blessed gift if one can make it a time of radical simplification at a profound level of ripe maturity. Otherwise, the prolonging of years tends to mean little but an extension of labor and sorrow, and as such is a dubious gift at best. Let us then examine a few of the areas in which character is newly tested during the later decades of life, and in which growth of character by simplification is needed. And in doing this, we shall seek to keep one point of view throughout, namely that the present trend toward longer life makes continued character growth the more imperative if modern Western civilization is to profit morally and spiritually by the opening up of this new continent of human life. One of the more obvious sets of changes overtaking one as age advances is the change of status, and that in several respects. For one thing, the individual changes status in the complex web of family relationships. Of course, he remains a father, a mother, a sister, a brother, or whatever else he may have been in a family group, but the meaning of his role changes in the sense that seed has become fruit. Love, kindliness, consideration, poured out into human relations in the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s now begin to bear such a harvest as they could not bear much earlier, for one now begins to move into old age, loved, respected, trusted, even venerated. But on the other hand, if one has invested his relations to the members of his family with selfishness, with distrust and suspicion, or with rejection and hatred, then the bitter bread he has cast on the waters comes back to him more bitter still. And as he moves on toward the end, he is borne up by the bonds of a steadily strengthening love, or else he begins to feel himself deserted and lonely long before he has lived out his years. Peculiarly difficult is the case of the solitary survivor of a family. If he has invested little emotionally as the years passed, he is perhaps not much more alone when solitary than when surrounded by relatives. But for one who has loved deeply and been loved devotedly, but who is now the last remaining leaf on his tree, there is a pathos too deep for expression, and a need which, if it be not met spiritually, can hardly be met at all. As family status changes, and as one gives up his job, prestige may dwindle too. He then will typically accept the altered prestige with such grace as he can muster, or devise ways to prop and bolster his waning prestige. Now, these changes in status and family and economic position and in one's prestige value are severe tests of one's character as age advances, and one is obliged to ask whether in Western civilization men as a whole can stand up to these tests as well as women do. Insofar as the answer is favorable to women, the implication for men would seem to be this, that men tend to need more relearning of life from middle age onward than women do. It is a well-known fact that women tend to live to an older age than men. Could it be that one of the reasons lies in this general area. In any event, if one's essential status in personal relationships has been sound, then as age advances, he can slough off the temporary aspects of the role that he has been obliged to play without disturbing too greatly the core of his selfhood. Then as age advances, he can push off the temporary aspects of the role he has been obliged to play without disturbing too greatly the core of his selfhood. The more casual and superficial changes of status which come with the passing of years bring no profound disturbances, and one can move into old age not with panic, but with serenity. In Western life, when an individual receives his first signals of approaching age, one of the major tests of character is upon him to reject and deny it, or to accept and affirm it. Shall one try frantically to freeze his life processes at some age as 30 or less, which he fancies he will never pass? Or is he able to be his age and move on with the profound life current, which bears him forward to deeper seas and eventually wider harbors? With such general alternatives before him, one is put to the test in many respects day after day as the years move on. For example, there is the need to simplify work, for the obvious reason that capacity for work is waning. Around this problem for character growth whirls a vast pother and to-do in American life, people pretending they are as good as I ever was, being mortally offended at the mention of gray hair, or shortened breath, or wrinkled skin. It is a species of indecent exposure of the naked self, terrified at the prospect of aging, which the world of nature thrusts upon us, but which a competitive civilization refuses to accept and honor. Here, once more, the soul, if it would avoid being crushed, must simplify itself in order to get above the juggernaut. Again, there is the character test, which waning sexual capacity thrusts upon one with the advent of middle life and old age. And here, as in all else with which we are dealing, the basic structure of the character determines how this particular bodily change can be handled. Insofar as an individual life is oriented around sex as a physical function and a sensual experience, to begin to lose it is a source of dismay or even of panic. But, on the contrary, when sex is contained within a web of profoundly satisfying human relations, then both the waxing and the waning of sexual capacity can be accepted as phases in the cycle of personal creativity. In that event, love contains sex, but is vastly deeper, wider, and longer than sex. Sex is of time and gradually subsides. Love is eternal, rejoicing in the body of the beloved, yet not decaying with the decay of the body, nor dying with its physical death. Love abideth. Once more, in old age, one is commonly to reckon with disabilities, malfunctioning of this or that part of the body, or helplessness, whether partial or complete. Often these impairments gravely disturb the equilibrium which the self has worked out up to the time of the onset. The disturbance to the family many times is even greater since their routine of life is upset. The budget is thrown out of balance, and mounting resentments cannot be openly expressed. Neither can they be successfully concealed. In all this, the aging person carries the old self into the new situation and meets it by his own basic formula, whatever that may be. Yet it's true that in many instances the aging person in his suffering achieves a triumph of character in the closing years, and out of the stuff of his personal tragedy weaves a parting gift to life which surpasses in value all that he had ever wrought before. This, many times, is an aged person's final discovery of the meaning of the cross, namely that out of present suffering, as well as out of that which took place long ago, there may come a redemptive gift, which is the gift of the suffering, yet triumphant self. This discovery he translates into the speech of his contemporaries through the language of his own meeting of pain. They, hearing it, knowing it to be an authentic translation and purged at last of human dross, thank God and take courage. To discover these things is not to plumb the depths of cosmic meaning which broke forth on that hill, but at least it is truly to know the fellowship of his suffering, that is, to share the cross at last in very fact. The term material simplification refers to the way one deals with things in the closing epoch of his life. The individual, while still an infant, encountered the world of things and established his basic formula in relation to things. In the most general terms, it can be said that he learned to make things either secondary or primary, and now, as age overtakes him, the final consequence of his earlier relationship to things are lived out. In the pattern of concentration, the individual, if he is able to dispose of his things, seems impelled to do so in a way which will exalt his own ego and prolong his own will and power after his death. Here we have the frequent spectacle of the aging individual who gives but contrives conditions which, as he hopes, will keep his name and fame alive, and which will permit him to keep his hand on the gift and its users, if possible, to the end of time. A rather dramatic instance was reported recently. An aged man who had never married had amassed a fortune amounting to a huge sum. He sought to give it to some educational institution which would pledge itself to teaching a certain political doctrine as to states' rights, and a certain social doctrine as to race relations. At the last account, he had not been able to find any school ready to bind itself in such a way that this aged man's will for his race and his nation could be propagandized into the life of the young for all generations to come. As simplification of status, of body, and of possessions takes place, it becomes more apparent that these are merely aspects of a still deeper simplification which is going on, and this we may call the simplification of character. That is to say, the basic formula by which one has met life in his earlier years often tends in his later years to stand out with still greater clarity. Disguises and pretenses drop away, and the self is more and more stripped bare, to be seen for what it really is. Persons whose basic formula had to do with profoundly threatened selfhood, and whose view of life was chiefly compounded of despair, often die long before old age, or else, if they survive, may be psychotic. And persons whose basic formula was some type of severe self-condemnation or extreme self-appreciation, if they cannot find a more adequate basis from which to meet life, very often end life in a psychotic state of excessive self-condemnation and depression, or, at the opposite pole, in exalted delusions of grandeur. This leaves basic character patterns of dependence, of materialism, and of relationship, respectively, as types of basic formulas common in old age. Any one of these may furnish a basis of survival into old age. We have already spoken of some frequent typical outcomes in old age when the basic formula of the individual life was one in which emotional security was sought in things. The most profound level at which character can be simplified is that of persons and personal relationships. The most profound of the relationships is the positive one, mature, outgoing love. When the character simplifies at that level as age advances, the pushing off of the superficial and the casual components of the self leaves, as it were, a white, pure core, which is essentially at home anywhere in the world with all sorts and conditions of persons, and at the same time it already feels at home in eternity, since the self already knows its way in the midst of eternal values. It is to be expected that one's philosophy of life will also simplify still further in old age, unless it has already reached great simplicity at an earlier stage. If the individual has developed a secular, to the exclusion of a religious view of life, he will sometimes be found struggling against religious concepts and values until the very end of his days. It is as if he were still trying to persuade himself there is nothing to religion and never quite succeeds in convincing himself, or, and perhaps more frequently, he settles into what has been called practical unbelief. That is, a course of life which religious values play no conscious part at all. From a wholly secular perspective, the tale of the years is told out to the end. In this case, the end is taken by the individual to be truly the end of all, for him as a person. There may be a little talk of immortality through one's descendants, or the immortality of influence, or we are quite as likely to overhear this person saying that one world has been enough, or he has no desire to live forever, or the wish for immortality is a selfish wish, and the like. But, regardless of the particular negative view of immortality which may be held, we are speaking now of the individual whose practical view is that human life is bounded by time, by nature, and by our planet, and bound in such a manner that to die is the end of all that we have known ourselves to be. The saga has snug itself out, and when the echo too dies away, that will be all. There is no more. On the other hand, if one has developed a religious view of life, we can expect that the religious outlook will simplify at the level of one's own spontaneous philosophy of life. At the same time, however, we must be prepared for the possibility that even in old age, the spiritual outlook will not only grow simpler and clearer, but also grow more profound. Among all the kinds of spiritual simplification which actually take place, two processes seem to be going on. It should be emphasized, however, that these do not necessarily wait until old age. One is a decreasing interest in those religious values which the individual finds to be marginal in his religious philosophy. This is the negative side of spiritual simplification. It means definitely getting rid of some things in the spiritual life which one has tried to carry out of a sense of duty, but which he has found are only a burden. And it means pushing other things in the spiritual life so far out to the margin that they will never again impede his spiritual growth. It would seem that this negative simplification is especially necessary in the case of persons who have had careful religious instruction from parents or church. For such a person often, perhaps normally, finds that he must put off some of the cargo which loving, conscientious hands put upon him. It is not necessarily a question of whether the teachings which he feels he must abandon are true. Perhaps the teaching which one feels compelled to abandon contains truth of greater absolute value than the teaching which he keeps and makes central. It is rather a question of the teachings which one finds to have no functional value to him. In other words, it's a prolonging of the quest for integrity between one's spontaneous and his acquired religious philosophy of life. Instances of the negative side of simplification are, of course, very abundant. No doubt they are to be seen in the life of any person who has continued to grow spiritually in middle life and in old age. A few examples will be sufficient to illustrate. There may be a simplification of doctrines. In this case, a person who once had been absorbed in the minute details of an elaborate system of doctrine finds himself sorting his beliefs into some order of relative importance, cherishing some and neglecting the others. This is sometimes the case with men whose early religious interest was apologetic, that is, a defense of the faith. One such person expressed the change which had overtaken him as he grew spiritually by saying, "I used to try to garrison the whole frontier of Christian doctrine, but now I find I had much better garrison my own heart." Simplification may take place in the realm of Christian duty. One may have been exceedingly zealous for this or that activity which he considered it his duty to follow, only to discover as time passes that this particular duty is taking him away from God rather than toward him. A certain American minister, for example, in his early professional life, distinguished himself by his aggressive prosecution of men whom he considered heretical. In later life, however, he became mellow with kindness and virtually disavowed his earlier career. Or simplification may concern itself with the practices of worship, for as one comes to see worship more and more as a direct and unmediated transaction between the soul and God, some of the outward forms seem to matter less and less. Thus, in the writings of Roman Catholic mystics, one often senses that the soul has risen above the sacrament of the Mass, and now knows how to commune with God and partake of Him face to face, without physical aids. Similarly, with many mature Protestant Christians as they grow old, they miss the comradeship of fellow Christians joining together in the acts of worship, but they no longer require the aid of man in meeting God. On the positive side, spiritual simplification is focusing upon the center in the total field of spiritual values and doing whatever is possible to keep that center clear, warm, and active. The form which this positive simplification takes will vary with individuals, of course, but a few instances will illustrate what happens. According to an ancient tradition, the Apostle John became a bishop of Ephesus and labored there until, at a great age, he grew too weak to preach or even to stand, and they would carry him to the church, seated, and he would say one sentence to the assembled people, "Little children, love one another." That was his entire life teaching, concentrated into one sentence. As Phillips Brody drew toward the end of his ministry in Boston after a long life, his biographer tells us that one theme began to dominate all that Brooks said to his people. That was the theme of God's fatherhood and man's sonship. Again and again, it would be put in such a manner as this: God is your father. Be to him as a son. Thus you will know the fullness of life. Or the spiritual simplification is often made evident by that in the Scriptures, which the individual makes central. Thus John A. Hutton, editor of the British Weekly, proposed that Paul's message to the world was summed up in the passage, "Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things. Those things which ye have both learned, and received, and heard, and seen in me, do, and the God of peace shall be with you." Now, whether or not this is the deepest insight into Paul does not for the moment matter, but it does tell us what was central to Hutton. When the self is simplifying positively at the profoundest level, which is the level of persons and personal relationships, this means that the aging but still growing person is increasingly basing all his selfhood on love. Outgoing and mature love, in the New Testament sense of agape. Love then toward God and man becomes more and more the very core of the simplifying self when the spiritual simplification is going on at this profoundest level. In the Pauline conception of this kind of spiritual simplification, love becomes the bond of perfectness. That is, love is the girdle or ligament which holds all the other strands of character in place. When the character structure is of this kind, the personality as a whole can move on and grow on toward its goal of perfectness. That is, the completeness or wholeness toward which its own inner nature is impelling it. The picture is a striking one. Put on, therefore, as God's elect, holy and beloved, a heart of compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, long-suffering, forbearing one another, and forgiving each other. If any man have a complaint against any, even as the Lord forgave you, so also do ye. And above all these things put on love, which is the bond of perfectness. And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to the which also ye were called in one body. Thus far we have said little as to the losses which are almost certain to overtake older people, that is, the personal losses which are suffered by the scattering of families, and especially by the death of the best beloved. There is a real sense in which nothing in the human scene can ever compensate for the loneliness which follows. On the face of the matter, it seems that human tragedy is only deepened if one bases his whole life on love and then loses the beloved. And that is the case if there is no sustaining fellowship of persons in the midst of whom the loss can be borne, and if there is no reasonable hope of personal reunion with the beloved. But it is precisely those two conditions which Christianity meets and thus draws the worst fangs of aging loneliness. The first condition, that of a sustaining fellowship within which loss and loneliness can be borne, is the Christian church. The church is itself a larger family, not to replace the intimate ties of the household, but to provide a continuity of unbroken human fellowship within which growth toward completeness can be going on, whether by households or by the solitary survivor of a household. One of the church's greatest services to older people lies just here. Personal observation and careful studies unite in stressing the significance of the supporting human fellowships within which the aging can move on toward their sunset. Church activities and programs seem commonly to play a decreasing part as age advances, but the warmth of a simple, genuine affection from pastor and congregation is truly a bread of life and a water of life to the old, and especially to the bereft and lonely. The other condition, namely that of a reasonable hope of reunion with the beloved, is met by the Christian hope of resurrection and immortality. Let it be called hope rather than a demonstrable proposition, but let it also be called a reasonable hope. For as we pointed out in our opening chapter, faith is the substance, that is, the present experiencing of the reality of everlasting life. And if Christianity is a daring venture in one's relation to all that exists, as indeed it is, the quality of daring in one's venture of faith does not lie so much in his daring to hope for life in the future. The greatest daring lies, rather, in the fact that a human creature made out of the dust of the earth should stake everything on love as the foundation of being here and now. But if any man would know it thoroughly in his own experience, he must needs give up his dependence, his role, his judgment of himself, his despair, and his possessions, in order that he may finally establish the self upon the eternal foundation of loving and being loved. See now the sublime epic of redemption and of eternal life leads to completeness. The human creature born of nature can love if he is loved. In earliest life, the love which he receives and that which he gives are good beyond all other human graces, yet that love, whether received or given, is always tinged with imperfection. That is, it is not perfect, not complete. The Christian symbols of salvation through Jesus Christ raise the meaning of being loved to a cosmic and eternal plane, for these symbols show perfect love coming forth eternally from God toward the human creature. These symbols pledge that God will supply the perfect love which it is beyond any human creature's capacity to give. So too, the Christian symbols concerning human faith raise the meaning of loving in response to that same plane of eternal significance. By loving in response to love poured out, the human creature born of nature is now born of the Spirit. And thus faith, which is love given in response to God, shades imperceptibly into the results of that faith, which is the substance, that is to say, the reality of eternal life in the present. At every stage throughout life, man is confronted in some manner by the living God, in the common crises of ordinary life. In each confrontation, the human soul is challenged to growth and further maturity, and at every stage he can go forward in faith or shrink back in unbelief. Then, as the human drama draws toward its close, a man is moving toward its final and most profound confrontation, which is not death, but life in transition. The Christian symbols concerning this unending life represented as a life of unimaginable completeness, unimaginable because we have nothing with which to compare it, or else a life of continuing deterioration. The I am, which is the human soul, knows itself about to encounter not a nothingness, but the I am who is God. And if one has been able to simplify the soul to its depths so that love is the foundation and essence of its being, that soul is at one with God. There is no need for a frantic unburdening of cargo, as if preparing for a storm. That disburdening of the soul has already been done in the process of simplification. Then it is as if the soul, already well at home in eternal life, should someday slip quietly away from out our bourne of time and place and sail into the sunrise. And the going is not an hour for sorrow, but rather for gladness, for the soul knows that it is not and will never be alone.